Welcome back to the channel. Today, we are beginning a brand new journey to study an ancient text that has completely shaped the foundation of global history. For over 2,000 years, military generals, absolute emperors, and billionaire executives have used one specific manual to conquer their enemies and secure massive empires. That manual is The Art of War by Sun Tzu. Before we step onto the ancient battlefield, please remember to check the description below. There is a secure link to purchase a physical copy of The Art of War. If you want to buy the book and study the original text for yourself, please use our link. It costs you absolutely nothing extra, but it provides vital support to this channel, allowing us to continue producing these massive, incredibly detailed psychological deep dives. Now, prepare your mind. We are going to translate ancient military strategy into the ultimate modern operating system for absolute victory. Chapter 1. The Architecture of Victory and the 5 Factors of Calculation. In the modern world, human beings are deeply conditioned to react to conflict with raw emotion. When someone insults us, we immediately shout back. When a rival company launches a competing product, our initial instinct is to panic and launch a rushed, aggressive counterattack. We view conflict as a sudden explosion of chaotic energy. Sun Tzu opens his legendary text by completely destroying this emotional approach to conflict. He states that warfare is a matter of vital importance to the state. It is the province of life and death and the road to survival or absolute ruin. Because the stakes are so incredibly high, conflict must never be entered into blindly or emotionally. The victor does not win by fighting harder. The victor wins by calculating deeper. According to Sun Tzu, a battle is actually won or lost before a single sword is ever drawn. The victory is secured in the quiet, completely silent moments of intense calculation. To achieve this supreme level of calculation, you must measure your upcoming conflict against 5 constant factors. The first factor is the moral law. This means absolute unity of purpose. In a modern context, this is your corporate culture or your family foundation. If your team does not fiercely believe in the core mission, they will completely abandon you the very second the battle becomes difficult. The second factor is heaven. This represents the uncontrollable variables of the environment. In military terms, it is the weather and the changing seasons. In modern terms, it is the economic climate, the changing market trends, and the absolute timing of your actions. You cannot fight a winter blizzard, and you cannot fight a massive economic recession. You must calculate the timing of your strike to align perfectly with the environment. The third factor is Earth. This represents the physical or digital terrain where the battle will be fought. You must intimately understand the distances, the danger, and the security of your operational ground. You must know the rules of the platform or the industry you are trying to conquer. The fourth factor is the commander. This represents the absolute virtues of leadership. Sun Tzu demands that a leader possess deep wisdom, absolute sincerity, extreme benevolence, strict courage, and unwavering strictness. A leader who is driven by their own fragile ego is a massive liability to the entire operation. The fifth and final factor is method and discipline. This is the boring, unglamorous reality of logistics. It is the management of resources, the control of expenses, and the structural integrity of your organization. A brilliant idea is completely worthless if you do not have the logistics to actually execute it. Once you have calculated these 5 factors, you must deploy the ultimate psychological weapon of the ancient world. Sun Tzu states that all warfare is fundamentally based on deception. If you are incredibly strong, you must go to great lengths to appear incredibly weak. If you are actively preparing for an attack, you must project an aura of total inactivity. You must constantly feed your enemy false information to keep them arrogant, confused, and entirely unprepared for the reality of your actual capabilities. Let us transition directly into our single, massively expansive case study to witness these ancient principles completely dominate a modern battlefield. We will examine how a master strategist uses calculation and absolute deception to bring down a massive, seemingly invincible opponent. Case Study 1. The Silent Architect and the Fall of the Titan meet Marcus. Marcus is the founder of a highly innovative but relatively small logistics technology company. His ultimate goal is to secure a massive government contract that would instantly make his company a global powerhouse. However, there is a terrifying obstacle in his path. The contract has been held for 15 consecutive years by a massive corporate monopoly. We will call the chief executive officer of this monopoly the Titan. The Titan is incredibly wealthy, highly aggressive, and extremely arrogant. He operates his corporation entirely on intimidation and brute force. When smaller companies try to compete with him, he uses his massive financial resources to completely crush them through endless legal battles and predatory pricing. If Marcus were an emotional leader, he would publicly announce his intention to steal the contract. He would try to fight the Titan in the press, issue bold statements, and attack the monopoly head-on. According to Sun Tzu, this would be absolute suicide. Marcus knows he cannot win a war of attrition against a giant. He must win through the 5 factors of calculation and the absolute mastery of deception. Marcus begins in total silence. He focuses entirely on the first factor, the moral law. For 2 full years, he does not expand his company externally. Instead, he focuses entirely inward. He builds a small elite team of engineers who are fiercely loyal to the company mission. He ensures that every single person in the building understands that they are preparing for the fight of their lives. He creates an unbreakable culture of absolute secrecy and total dedication. Next, Marcus calculates heaven and earth. He studies the exact timeline of the government contract renewal. He realizes that the renewal happens precisely during a major shift in federal data security regulations. This regulatory shift is the terrain. He knows that the Titan uses ancient, outdated software that will be incredibly difficult to upgrade to meet the new security standards. Marcus directs his elite team to build a completely new platform explicitly designed to dominate this specific new regulatory terrain. While his team is secretly building the ultimate weapon, Marcus executes the most crucial phase of the strategy. He deploys the art of absolute deception. He knows that the Titan has corporate spies watching the market. Marcus purposefully leaks false financial documents indicating that his company is struggling to secure funding. He attends major industry conferences wearing cheap, rumpled clothing and speaks with a hesitant, defeated tone. He intentionally loses a few very small, insignificant local contracts to make his company look incredibly incompetent. The deception works flawlessly. The Titan receives the reports about Marcus and laughs. He views Marcus as a pathetic, failing amateur. Because the Titan believes his enemy is incredibly weak, he becomes complacent. He decides to delay upgrading his own massive software systems to save money, assuming no real competitor exists to challenge him for the upcoming government contract renewal. He violates the fourth factor of leadership by letting his massive ego completely blind his operational vision. The clock slowly ticks down to the exact day the government opens the bidding process for the massive contract. The Titan submits his standard overpriced proposal using his outdated technology. Absolutely confident that he would simply be handed the victory out of sheer habit, he goes to sleep that night completely unaware that a trap 2 years in the making is about to snap shut. At the very last possible second before the submission window closes, Marcus strikes. He submits a massive, brilliantly calculated proposal. He reveals the revolutionary new software his team built in absolute silence. His platform perfectly aligns with the new regulatory environment. Furthermore, because he meticulously managed his internal logistics and expenses using the fifth factor of method and discipline, his operational costs are a fraction of the giant monopoly. He underbids the Titan by a massive margin while offering an infinitely superior product. When the government committee reviews the proposals, the choice is overwhelmingly obvious. They immediately award the entire 15-year contract to Marcus and his small elite team. The Titan wakes up the next morning to discover that his absolute empire has completely collapsed overnight. Tries to launch a massive legal counterattack out of sheer rage. But Marcus anticipated this emotional reaction. Marcus already secured bulletproof legal patents for his entire software architecture. The Titan is left completely powerless, screaming into the void, destroyed not by a bigger army, but by a quieter, far more calculated mind. Marcus did not win the battle on the day the contract was awarded. He won the battle 2 years earlier, when he decided to swallow his own pride, appear incredibly weak, and calculate every single variable in absolute silence. He allowed his enemy to be defeated by their own arrogant hubris. This expansive case study provides the ultimate blueprint for your own personal and professional conflicts. You must completely abandon the emotional need to look tough, successful, and intimidating. When you loudly broadcast your goals to the world, you give your enemies a perfectly clear target to attack. You surrender all of your strategic leverage just to feed your own temporary ego. Your practical application for this first chapter is to initiate the discipline of strategic silence. Look at the biggest goal you are currently trying to achieve. Do not post about it on social media. Do not brag about your early progress to your colleagues. Do not try to intimidate your competitors. Instead, step into the shadows and begin your calculations. Audit your internal discipline. Study the changing environment of your industry. Map out the terrain you need to cross. Build your resources in total privacy. If people assume you are inactive or unambitious, let them believe it. Let them underestimate you. Their underestimation is the greatest gift they can possibly give you. Keep your true capabilities completely hidden until the exact moment of execution. And when you finally decide to strike, make sure your victory is so absolute and so perfectly calculated that your opponent has absolutely no chance to react. In our opening chapter, we explored the silent architecture of victory. We learned that the greatest generals completely ignore their emotional impulses and secure their triumphs through deep calculation and absolute deception before the battle even begins. Now we must move from the planning phase into the execution phase. Once you have made the calculated decision to engage in a conflict, you must understand the terrifying economic and psychological realities of the battlefield. This brings us to the second chapter of Sun Tzu, which focuses on the absolute necessity of lightning speed and the devastating, completely ruinous cost of prolonged warfare. Chapter 2. The Mathematics of Exhaustion and the Weapon of Speed. Human society heavily romanticizes the concept of the long, grueling struggle. We love cinematic stories about armies fighting bitter, freezing campaigns for years on end, or corporate executives battling in courtrooms for a decade simply to prove a point. We associate prolonged suffering with honor and dedication. Sun Tzu completely despises this romantic illusion. He views a prolonged campaign as the ultimate failure of leadership. He states explicitly that there is no instance of a country having benefited from prolonged warfare. When you engage in actual combat, if victory is long in coming, the weapons of your soldiers will grow dull and their absolute zeal will be completely damped. If you lay siege to a town, you will exhaust your strength. Furthermore, if the campaign is protracted, the resources of the state will simply not be equal to the strain. In the modern world, this concept represents your financial burn rate and your psychological endurance. Conflict is incredibly expensive. Every single day you remain in a state of active warfare, whether that is a bitter divorce, a massive corporate lawsuit, or a ruthless retail price war. You are bleeding resources. You are paying exorbitant legal fees. You are burning through your startup capital. Most importantly, you are completely draining the emotional energy of yourself and your team. When a conflict drags on for years, a terrifying psychological rot begins to take hold. Your team forgets the original purpose of the company because the conflict becomes their entire identity. Creativity completely dies. Joy evaporates. The focus shifts entirely from building a beautiful future to simply destroying the enemy. Sun Tzu issues a massive warning regarding this exhaustion. He states that when your weapons are dulled, your ardor damped, your strength exhausted, and your treasure spent, other chieftains will spring up to take advantage of your extreme extremity. Then no man, however wise, will be able to avert the consequences that must ensue. If you spend 3 years fighting a bitter war of attrition against your biggest competitor, you might eventually win. You might bankrupt them and stand victorious over their corporate grave. But you would be so financially devastated and so completely exhausted that a third, entirely fresh competitor will simply walk into the market and easily crush you both. Therefore, the absolute highest priority in any conflict is rapid execution. Let your great object be victory, not lengthy campaigns. A clever general understands that a messy, imperfect peace signed today is infinitely more valuable than a perfect total victory achieved 5 years from now. To achieve this necessary speed, Sun Tzu introduces a brilliant logistical strategy. He commands the smart general to bring war material from home, but to forage on the enemy. He states that 1 cartload of enemy provisions is equivalent to 20 of your own. Why? Because the logistics of transporting your own resources across massive distances is incredibly exhausting. If you can steal the momentum, the resources, or the marketing budget of your massive opponent, you instantly double your own strength while simultaneously halving theirs. Let us transition directly into our single, massively expansive case study to witness these exact principles completely dominate a modern battlefield. We will examine how an independent business owner avoided the trap of a prolonged siege, executed a lightning-fast pivot, and completely forged her victory using the massive resources of her giant enemy. Case study 1. The Boutique Siege and the Art of the Pivot. Meet Victoria. Victoria is the founder and chief executive of a highly successful, independent coffee roasting company located in a major metropolitan city. She has spent 5 grueling years building a premium brand, securing incredibly loyal customers, and establishing a beautiful corporate culture. Her immense success attracts the attention of a massive international coffee conglomerate. We will call this ruthless corporate giant the Behemoth. The Behemoth decides they want to completely dominate Victoria and capture her entire city market. The Behemoth uses the classic, brutal strategy of absolute corporate attrition. They possess billions of dollars in cash reserves. They use this massive treasure to open 3 giant retail locations immediately surrounding Victoria. Then, they initiate a devastating price war. They intentionally drop the prices of their premium coffee so low that they are actually losing money on every single cup they sell. Their strategy is a prolonged siege. They know Victoria operates on tight margins. They know she does not have the financial reserves to survive a 2-year price war. Their goal is to slowly bleed her bank account dry until she is forced to declare bankruptcy and close her doors forever. When the siege begins, Victoria feels a massive surge of panic and rage. Her initial purely emotional instinct is to fight back. She considers taking out massive business loans to match their artificially low prices. She considers launching a massive, expensive marketing campaign to beg the local community to support independent businesses. She wants to dig trenches and fight a long, honorable war of survival. But Victoria studies the ancient texts. She reads the 2nd chapter of Sun Tzu and realizes that engaging in a prolonged campaign of attrition against a global empire is absolute suicide. Her emotional zeal will dampen, her bank account will empty. If she fights them on their terms, she will lose her business and her sanity. She must secure a rapid, decisive victory, and she must forage on the enemy. Victoria looks closely at the strategy of the behemoth. She realizes they are spending millions of dollars on local advertising, blanketing the entire city with massive billboards, radio advertisements, and digital campaigns bragging about their new premium, locally roasted coffee experience. They are spending an absolute fortune educating the city about high-quality coffee. Victoria executes a lightning-fast strategic pivot. Instead of lowering her prices to fight the long war, she completely shocks the market by actually raising her prices significantly. She absolutely abandons the mainstream retail coffee market overnight. She rebrands her company as the ultimate pinnacle of luxury, artisanal roasting. She changes her packaging to look like high-end luxury goods. Then she executes the foraging strategy. She uses the massive educational marketing of the behemoth entirely against them. Every single time the behemoth runs an expensive advertisement claiming to be a premium roast, Victoria runs a highly targeted, incredibly cheap digital advertisement right alongside it. Her advertisement calmly thanks the behemoth for introducing the general public to decent coffee and exclusively invites the truly discerning, wealthy customers to taste what actual perfection tastes like. She does not try to outspend the global empire. She uses their massive educational marketing budget to filter the absolute wealthiest, most dedicated coffee connoisseurs directly into her own ecosystem. One cartload of their millions in advertising becomes equivalent to 20 cartloads of her own limited budget. Furthermore, Victoria executes rapid physical movement to completely escape the physical siege. While the behemoth is bogged down managing massive retail stores, paying exorbitant commercial rent, and dealing with hundreds of minimum wage employees, Victoria closes her public-facing retail cafe entirely, removes her roasting equipment into a cheap, secure warehouse on the edge of the city. She pivots her entire business model exclusively to high-margin digital subscriptions and direct-to-consumer corporate sales. She completely removes herself from the physical street corner, where the behemoth had spent millions preparing to fight a 3-year war of attrition. The psychological impact on the executives at the behemoth is absolute confusion. They had prepared for a long, grinding war. They expected Victoria to bleed out slowly over 36 months. Instead, the enemy completely vanished from the battlefield in less than 4 weeks. Within exactly 1 month, the conflict is completely over. The behemoth won the physical street corner, but they are left bleeding cash to maintain their massive stores. Meanwhile, Victoria captured the entire premium luxury market of the entire city. Her profit margins absolutely explode. Her commercial overhead plummets to almost zero, and her daily stress completely vanishes because she refused to fight a long, exhausting war. She moved with lightning speed, changed the terrain, and fed her own massive growth using the momentum and the money of a giant enemy. This expansive case study provides a critical blueprint for your own professional and personal life. The human ego constantly demands that we fight long, bitter battles to prove our own righteousness. We hold on to toxic lawsuits, we engage in endless family feuds, and we fight brutal corporate wars simply because we refuse to back down. Your practical application for this chapter is to conduct a massive audit of your current conflicts. Are you currently engaged in a long, exhausting battle of attrition? Are you fighting a war that is draining your financial treasure and dulling your creative weapons? You must drop your ego and realize the terrifying cost of a prolonged campaign. If you cannot win a conflict quickly and decisively, you must radically change your strategy. Find a way to completely alter the terrain. Find a way to step off the battlefield entirely. Look at the momentum of your enemy and find a creative way to forage on their resources. Stop valuing the romantic idea of a long struggle and start valuing the absolute peace of mind that comes from rapid execution and total strategic flexibility. We explored the terrible mathematics of exhaustion. We learned that fighting a prolonged campaign is the ultimate failure of leadership, and that a brilliant strategist must prioritize lightning speed to preserve their financial treasure and their psychological energy. Learn to abandon the romantic illusion of the long, bitter struggle. Today, we reach the absolute pinnacle of Sun Tzu and his ancient wisdom. If you completely internalize the principles of Chapter 3, you will elevate yourself above 99% of modern leaders, executives, and competitors. You will learn the ultimate secret of the ancient masters. You will learn how to achieve absolute, total victory without ever fighting a single battle. Chapter 3. Attack by Stratagem and the Bloodless Victory. In Western culture, we are deeply conditioned to view victory exclusively through the lens of total destruction. We watch movies where the hero must completely annihilate the villain in a massive, fiery explosion. We apply the same logic to our careers and our personal lives. We believe that to win an argument, we must completely humiliate the other person. We believe that to win a corporate competition, we must bankrupt our rival and salt the earth beneath their corporate headquarters. Sun Tzu considers this approach to be incredibly amateur and deeply flawed. states that to fight and conquer in all your battles is not supreme excellence. Supreme excellence consists in breaking the enemy resistance without fighting. He argues that it is always better to capture an entire army intact than to destroy it. Why? Because a destroyed army offers you absolutely nothing. It is a pile of ash and completely wasted resources. But a captured army can be absorbed into your own ranks, instantly doubling your massive power. If you bankrupt the competitor, you destroy the infrastructure, the real estate, and the talent pool that you could have otherwise integrated into your own growing empire. To achieve this bloodless victory, Sun Tzu outlines a strict hierarchy of strategy. He states that the highest form of generalship is to balk the enemy plans. The next best is to prevent the junction of the enemy forces, which means ruining their alliances. The next in order is to attack the enemy army in the field. And the absolute worst policy of all is to besiege walled cities. Attacking a walled city is the ancient equivalent of a brute force, frontal assault. It is suing a massive corporation with a tiny legal budget. It is getting into a screaming match with a completely irrational person. It requires massive energy, the casualties would be absolutely horrific, and even if you win, you would be completely devastated by the effort. A master strategist never attacks a walled city. Instead, they dismantle the enemy from the outside in. Let us transition directly into our single, massively expansive case study to witness this exact hierarchy of strategy executed perfectly in the modern corporate world. We will watch a brilliant protagonist completely conquer a massive empire without ever firing a single shot or raising her voice in anger. Case study 1. The Architect and the Invisible Conquest. Meet Elena. Elena is a visionary architect who recently launched her own boutique commercial design firm. Her company is small, agile, and heavily focused on futuristic, totally sustainable building materials. She has spent 3 years quietly building a reputation for absolute excellence and brilliant innovation. Her rapidly growing reputation catches the attention of a massive legacy real estate firm. We record the chief executive officer of this firm, the Emperor. The Emperor runs a massive traditional architecture corporation. He has hundreds of employees, massive overhead, and a towering, incredibly fragile ego, but his designs are stale, outdated, and heavily reliant on cheap, environmentally damaging materials. The Emperor notices that Elena is starting to win bids for highly lucrative downtown projects. His ego cannot handle the competition. He views her small firm as a direct insult to his legacy. He decides he wants to completely destroy her firm. If the Emperor were a master strategist, he would try to buy her firm peacefully and integrate her brilliance into his operation, but he is driven by arrogance. He plans a classic walled city siege. He decides to use his massive financial leverage to buy out her exclusive local suppliers, effectively cutting off her access to the specific sustainable materials she needs to build her futuristic designs. He also plans to launch a massive, expensive marketing campaign attacking her credibility while secretly offering triple salaries to poach her top 3 leading engineers. He wants to crush her into total, humiliating submission. Elena has highly placed industry contacts, and she learns about the impending siege weeks before it begins. An amateur would panic. An emotional leader would immediately hire aggressive lawyers and prepare to fight a massive bloody war of attrition in the public court, draining all of their startup capital just to survive the legal fees. But Elena studies the art of war. She knows that fighting the Emperor directly is exactly what he wants. She refuses to attack his walled city. Instead, she executes the absolute highest form of generalship. She balks his plans. Before the Emperor can even launch his aggressive buyout of her local suppliers, Elena quietly and rapidly shifts her entire supply chain. She signs exclusive, completely ironclad contracts with revolutionary new material vendors located entirely overseas. She secures these international contracts in absolute total silence. When the Emperor finally makes his massive financial move to buy the local suppliers, he spends millions of dollars securing companies that Elena no longer even uses. His first plan completely fails, and he has wasted a massive amount of his own treasure in the process, while Elena simply continues to build. Elena immediately moves to the second level of Sun Tzu's strategy. She ruins his alliances. She knows that the Emperor relies on one massive anchor client to keep his bloated corporation afloat. This client is a global commercial developer planning a billion-dollar urban revitalization project. The Emperor has held this alliance for 20 years through sheer habit and comfortable complacency. Assuming the developer would never leave him, Elena does not attack the Emperor. She simply bypasses him entirely. She secures a private, highly confidential meeting with the board of directors for the global commercial developer. She does not spend the meeting criticizing the Emperor or talking about his aggressive tactics. Instead, she presents a breathtaking, fully realized architectural model for their new revitalization project. Her design is entirely zero carbon, heavily relies on a new exclusive overseas supply chain, and is mathematically proven to save the developer tens of millions in long-term energy costs over the next decade. She presents a future that the Emperor is completely incapable of building because he is entirely trapped in the architecture of the past. The board of directors is absolutely mesmerized by her vision and her flawless logistical planning. The very next morning, they quietly sever their 20-year alliance with the emperor and sign an exclusive, massive contract with Elena. Elena has just severed the main financial artery of her massive opponent without ever engaging him in a direct conflict. The aftermath is swift and devastating for the emperor. Without his massive anchor client, his enormous corporate overhead becomes an instant death sentence. He is bleeding cash at an uncontrollable rate. His expensive marketing campaign against Elena is completely defunded before it ever launches. He cannot afford to poach her engineers because he can barely afford to pay his own administrative staff. His walled city is completely starving from the inside out. This is the exact moment where an emotional victor would bloat. An arrogant victor would watch the emperor go bankrupt, laugh at his total destruction, and celebrate their absolute dominance. But Elena is a master of the bloodless victory. She remembers the core philosophy that capturing an army intact is infinitely better than destroying it entirely. The emperor still has a massive pool of talented, incredibly experienced draft workers and a highly valuable portfolio of prime downtown real estate that Elena could use to expand her new projects. Elena approaches the emperor in his darkest hour. She offers him a highly dignified, incredibly generous merger agreement. She offers to absorb his entire company into her new empire. She promises to keep all of his lower-level employees securely employed, integrating their experience into her visionary new projects. Furthermore, she offers the emperor a highly lucrative retirement package and a ceremonial title on her new board of directors, allowing him to completely save face in the local industry and walk away with his pride largely intact. The emperor is completely defeated, totally exhausted, and entirely out of options. He realizes he has been outplayed on every single level. He happily signs the paperwork and surrenders his entire empire to her without a single argument. Elena achieved absolute total victory. She completely eliminated her biggest rival, absorbed all of his highly valuable assets, protected his innocent employees, and secured a massive global contract. She doubled her corporate power overnight. And she achieved all of this without ever engaging in a single lawsuit, without ever fighting a public battle, and without ever attacking his walled city. She used pure, silent strategy to make his defeat completely inevitable and his surrender highly profitable. This massive case study provides a beautiful and terrifying blueprint for your own personal and professional conflicts. We spend so much of our precious life energy attacking walled cities. We argue with incredibly stubborn relatives who will never change their minds. We fight endless, exhausting bureaucratic battles at work, trying to force corrupt systems to play fair. We launch massive frontal assaults based entirely on our own emotional outrage, and we return home completely battered, bruised, and emotionally empty. Your ultimate practical application for this chapter is to completely abandon the frontal assault. When you face a massive obstacle, a deeply aggressive opponent, or a toxic environment, do not charge at them with raw emotion. Step back, completely detach your ego, and analyze their strategy. How can you balk their plans before they even begin? What alliances are they relying on to maintain their power? And how can you render those alliances completely obsolete through your own sheer excellence? How can you create a situation where fighting you becomes so incredibly difficult and so completely illogical that they simply choose to surrender on your terms? You must train your mind to seek the bloodless victory. Let your enemies exhaust themselves, attacking empty spaces, while you quietly secure the resources, the relationships, and the absolute high ground. When you master the art of winning without fighting, you conserve all of your life energy, and you become absolutely invincible. In the previous chapter of our deep dive into the art of war, we discovered the absolute pinnacle of strategic brilliance. We learned that the greatest generals completely abandoned the romantic illusion of the brutal frontal assault. We learned how to secure a bloodless victory by destroying the alliances of our enemy and completely bypassing their walled cities. Today, we are shifting our focus from the external battlefield to the internal foundation. We are going to explore the terrifying power of absolute patience and the architecture of personal invincibility. This brings us to Chapter 4 of Sun Tzu, focusing entirely on the concept of tactical dispositions. Chapter 4. Tactical dispositions and the fortress of invincibility. In our modern society, we are completely obsessed with the concept of the offensive strike. We idolize the aggressive entrepreneur who launches massive hostile takeovers. We celebrate the ruthless litigator who crushes the opposition in court. We are taught that victory requires constant, aggressive forward movement. We believe that if we are not actively attacking our problems, we are passively losing the war. Sun Tzu completely inversed this modern obsession. He states that the good fighters of old first put themselves beyond the possibility of defeat and then waited for an opportunity of defeating the enemy. This is a profound and fundamental shift in how you must view the universe. Sun Tzu reveals the brutal truth about human conflict. You have absolutely zero control over the mistakes of your enemy. You cannot force a highly intelligent opponent to stumble. You cannot magically wave a wand and make your corporate rival go bankrupt. To secure ourselves against defeat lies in our own hands, but the opportunity of defeating the enemy is provided by the enemy himself. Therefore, your absolute highest priority is not planning planning the perfect attack. Your highest priority is building a flawless, impenetrable defense. You must make yourself completely unconquerable. Sun Tzu writes that invincibility lies in the defense, while the possibility of victory rests in the attack. If you do not have an opportunity to safely attack, you must hide your troops, conserve your resources, and simply wait. This requires a level of psychological control that most modern humans simply do not possess. We hate waiting. When someone insults us, we want to immediately destroy them. When a rival takes our market share, we want to immediately launch a counterattack. But an emotional, impatient attack usually exposes our own vital organs to the enemy blade. Sun Tzu delivers one of the most chilling and brilliant quotes in the entire text to summarize this philosophy. He states that the victorious strategist only seeks battle after the victory has already been won, whereas he who is destined to defeat first fights and afterwards looks for victory. A master of tactical disposition never leaves their fortress to fight an uncertain battle. They sit perfectly still inside their completely impregnable walls, watching the enemy exhaust themselves outside the gates. They wait for the exact moment the frustrated enemy drops their shield, and only then do they finally strike. Let us transition directly into our single, highly expansive case study to witness this philosophy of total invincibility operating perfectly in the modern world. We will step into the invisible, highly dangerous realm of global digital security to watch a master of tactical disposition completely break a massive invading force simply by refusing to fight them. Case study 1. The silent vault and the exhausted raiders meet Julian. Julian is the visionary founder of an elite, highly secretive cybersecurity corporation. He does not build standard antivirus software for normal consumers. He builds bespoke, impenetrable digital vaults for ultra-high net worth individuals, massive international banks, and sensitive government contractors. His entire business model is based on the absolute promise of total unbreachable security. Because Julian protects billions of dollars in digital assets, he attracts the attention of the most dangerous digital predators on the planet. A notorious, highly aggressive international hacker syndicate targets his corporation. We will call this syndicate the Raiders. The Raiders are brilliant, heavily funded, and profoundly arrogant. They operate like a digital barbarian horde, overwhelming the defenses of massive corporations through sheer brute force computing power and relentless, massive denial of service attacks. They want to breach the vault of Julian to steal the client data, hold it for a massive cryptocurrency ransom, and publicly humiliate him in the global technology press. The Raiders launch a highly public intimidation campaign. They post absolute threats on the dark web, promising to completely dismantle the infrastructure of Julian within 72 hours. The global financial markets panic. The clients of Julian flood his phone lines, demanding to know how he plans to counterattack the syndicate. An emotional leader would panic under this massive public pressure. An amateur CEO would immediately hire aggressive digital mercenaries to try and hack the Raiders back. They would try to trace the origin points, launch offensive malware, and fight a massive digital war in the open internet. But Julian is a master of the art of war. He understands that launching an offensive digital strike requires opening ports in his own firewall. To attack the enemy, he must lower his own shield. He refuses to give the Raiders the opportunity to slip inside. Julian completely ignores the public pressure. He ignores the panicked phone calls. He gathers his elite team of engineers and issues a single, absolute directive. They will not launch a single offensive countermeasure. They will dedicate 100% of their computing power and human energy to reinforcing their internal tactical disposition. They will monitor the defensive walls, balance the server loads, and simply watch the attack happen. They will make themselves completely unconquerable. The 72-hour countdown ends, and the Raiders launch their massive assault. Millions of malicious digital requests flood the servers of Julian every single second. The attack is terrifying in its sheer volume. Inside the Security Operations Center, Julian sits perfectly still. He watches the massive red spikes on the global traffic monitors. His engineers work in absolute silence, automatically shifting server loads and dynamically reinforcing the firewalls. They do not fight back. They simply absorb the impact like a massive sponge absorbing a drop of water. The first day passes. The vault remains completely sealed. The Raiders begin to experience the exact mathematics of exhaustion we discussed in the previous chapter. They are burning massive amounts of expensive server time. Furthermore, their massive, fragile egos are deeply wounded. They promise the dark web a spectacular victory, and instead, they are hitting a solid titanium wall. By the third day, the psychological dynamic completely shifts. The Raiders are furious, exhausted, and deeply impatient. They cannot understand why Julian is not fighting back. They desperately want him to make a mistake, to launch a counterattack, to do absolutely anything that would expose a vulnerability. Because Julian refuses to give them an opportunity, the Raiders decide to force an opportunity. This is their fatal error. In their blind rage and absolute desperation to break the wall, they abandon their careful operational security. They deploy an experimental, highly unstable piece of brute force software that they have never properly tested. The experimental software launches, but because it is unstable, it completely misfires. It crashes against the flawless defensive architecture of Julian and violently rebounds. The massive digital backfire completely strips away the protective proxy servers, masking the true location of the raiders. For exactly 4 seconds, the true naked internet protocol addresses of the entire syndicate leadership are completely exposed on the global network. Julian does not gloat. He does not post a victory message. He calmly takes a pristine, mathematically undeniable screenshot of the raw traffic data. He packages the exposed geographical coordinates into a highly encrypted file, and he silently emails it directly to the cyber division of Interpol. 12 hours later, federal authorities physically raid 4 separate locations across the globe, arresting the entire leadership structure of the syndicate. Julian won the war without ever writing a single line of offensive code. He did not defeat the enemy. He simply built an absolutely perfect tactical disposition and allowed the enemy to completely destroy themselves against it. He understood that invincibility lied in his defense, and the opportunity for victory was ultimately provided by the massive arrogance of his exhausted opponent. This brilliant and expansive case study is the ultimate blueprint for your own survival in a highly chaotic, aggressive world. We spend massive amounts of our daily life energy trying to control the behavior of toxic people, aggressive co-workers, and hostile competitors. We exhaust ourselves trying to force them to understand our perspective or force them to back down. Your practical application for this chapter is to completely abandon the illusion of external control. You cannot control a toxic boss. You cannot control a volatile family member. You cannot control a chaotic economic market. You can only control your own internal and external tactical disposition. If you are dealing with an incredibly aggressive person in your workplace, stop trying to argue with them. Stop trying to plan the perfect verbal comeback. Do exactly what Julian did. Make yourself professionally unconquerable. Document every single task you complete. Perfect your daily workflow. Make your value to the company so absolutely undeniable and mathematically flawless that the toxic coworker looks completely foolish whenever they try to criticize you. Let them exhaust themselves throwing petty insults against your titanium wall of absolute competence. Furthermore, apply this to your financial life. You cannot control global inflation or sudden corporate layoffs, but you can build a massive, impenetrable emergency fund. When the economic winter arrives, the people who lived completely on credit will desperately scramble to survive. But if you have built a perfect financial defense, you will sit peacefully inside your fortress, completely untouched by the chaos outside. You must learn to find extreme comfort in absolute patience. Build your walls, master your skills, and protect your resources. Become an immovable object. When the chaotic, impatient forces of the world finally clash against you, they will break their own bones while you simply remain standing. We built the ultimate fortress of invincibility. We learned how to secure our tactical disposition in total silence and wait patiently for the enemy to completely exhaust themselves against our walls. We learn the profound value of absolute stillness. Today, we transition from the perfect stillness of defense to the terrifying, unstoppable momentum of the attack. We are exploring Chapter 5 of the ancient text, which focuses entirely on the brilliant physics of conflict and the concept of energy. Chapter 5. The physics of momentum and the balance of tactics. When modern society thinks about winning a massive victory, we almost always default to the concept of raw strength. We assume the largest army always wins. We assume the wealthiest corporation always dominates the market. We assume the loudest, most aggressive person in the room always dictates the negotiation. Sun Tzu completely shatters this assumption. He teaches us that raw strength is completely irrelevant if it lacks momentum. Sun Tzu states that the control of a massive force is the exact same principle as the control of a few men. It is merely a question of dividing up their numbers. But more importantly, he introduces the most vital concept in all of offensive strategy. He introduces the perfect balance of direct and indirect methods. In the original ancient language, these complementary forces are known as Cheng and Qi. In any conflict, you must use the direct method to join the battle, but you must use the indirect method to actually secure the absolute victory. What does this mean in the practical modern world? The direct method is exactly what your enemy expects you to do. It is the standard operating procedure. It is the highly predictable frontal engagement. The indirect method is the completely unorthodox, highly creative, and totally unexpected strike from a hidden angle. If you exclusively use direct methods, you become completely predictable. Your enemy can easily map your movements, anticipate your budget, and build massive walls to block your standard attacks. If you exclusively use indirect methods, you look like a chaotic amateur, and you will never actually hold the attention of your opponent long enough to strike a fatal blow. The absolute mastery of conflict requires you to flawlessly combine both forces. You use the direct method to lock your enemy into place, holding their attention and making them feel comfortable in their predictability. Then, while they are completely focused on your heavily fortified front line, you unleash the indirect strike from an angle they never even considered possible. Sun Tzu compares this brilliant combination to the endless cycle of the sun and the moon, or the endless rotation of the four seasons. He notes that there are only 5 primary musical notes, but the combinations of those 5 notes create infinite melodies. There are only 5 primary colors, but their combinations create every magnificent painting in human history. Similarly, there are only 2 primary methods in war, direct and indirect, but their combinations are completely limitless and entirely unpredictable. Furthermore, Sun Tzu compares the concept of strategic energy to the bending of a massive military crossbow. Building your corporate infrastructure, securing your finances, and positioning your elite team is the drawing of the crossbow string. It requires immense tension, deep calculation, and absolute patience. But the actual decision to strike is the pulling of the trigger. The release must be instantaneous. The massive energy you have stored in absolute silence for months is suddenly unleashed in a fraction of a second, creating a physical momentum so incredibly powerful that absolutely no defensive wall can withstand the impact. Sun Tzu compares the stored energy to a massive boulder perched at the very top of a towering mountain. The boulder itself is just a rock, but when the master strategist pushes it over the edge, the terrifying momentum of gravity gives that simple rock the absolute power to crush everything in its path. Let us transition directly into our massively detailed case study to witness this terrifying momentum executed perfectly. We will explore how a visionary entrepreneur perfectly balanced direct and indirect methods to completely dismantle a legacy titan in one of the oldest and most rigid industries on earth. Case 31. The Catalyst and the Unstoppable Avalanche. Meet Sarah. Sarah is a highly aggressive, brilliantly calculated logistics engineer. She decides to launch her own company in the commercial freight shipping industry. This is a brutal, heavily saturated market completely dominated by massive legacy corporations with endless financial resources. The absolute biggest player in her specific region is an incredibly wealthy, deeply entrenched transportation empire. We will call this giant the Monolith. The Monolith operates purely on massive direct energy. They own thousands of giant diesel trucks, they operate enormous concrete warehouses on the edges of the city, and they possess a deeply predictable, standardized method of moving commercial cargo. They rely entirely on their massive physical size and their massive bank accounts to slowly crush any new competitors who dare to enter their territory. Sarah knows that if she tries to fight the Monolith using only direct methods, she would be instantly annihilated. She cannot afford to buy thousands of heavy trucks. She cannot afford to build giant concrete warehouses. He must use the direct method to engage their attention and make them feel arrogant, but she must secretly build a massive reserve of indirect energy to actually destroy their empire. Sarah begins a corporate campaign by launching a very small, incredibly standard regional delivery service. This is her direct engagement. She purchases exactly 10 standard delivery vehicles and begins competing for very basic, low-margin commercial contracts strictly in the industrial district. The highly paid executives at the Monolith immediately notice her entry into the market. They analyze her standard delivery vehicles. They look at her highly basic corporate website and they laugh in their boardrooms. She looks exactly like every other pathetic amateur who has ever tried to challenge their supremacy. Because she is using a standard direct method, she fits perfectly into their predictable worldview. They decide to crush her slowly and painfully. They lower their regional prices in the industrial district just enough to make her daily operations highly uncomfortable, assuming she will simply run out of capital and declare bankruptcy in a few short months. While the executives at the Monolith are completely focused on this tiny, highly predictable direct battle in the industrial district, they completely fail to realize that Sarah is drawing a massive, invisible crossbow directly at their corporate heart. The 10 standard delivery trucks are nothing but a strategic distraction. They are the direct method used exclusively to lock the enemy into place and feed their massive ego. Behind the scenes, Sarah is executing a brilliant, entirely indirect strategy. She realizes that the absolute biggest weakness of the Monolith is their strict reliance on massive, expensive, centralized warehouses located far outside the city limits. Moving heavy cargo from these distant warehouses into the highly congested urban center during normal business hours is incredibly slow, deeply inefficient, and massively expensive. Sarah completely abandons the ancient concept of the centralized warehouse. Instead, she spends 8 grueling months quietly approaching the desperate owners of struggling urban retail stores, empty commercial parking garages, and abandoned downtown office spaces. She signs hundreds of incredibly cheap, highly secretive micro-leasing agreements. She transforms these tiny, unused spaces into a massive, decentralized network of hidden storage hubs located directly inside the most congested, highly profitable commercial zones of the entire city. Simultaneously, she develops a proprietary, highly advanced routing algorithm that relies entirely on an army of independent bicycle couriers and electric cargo scooters. This fleet can completely bypass the massive urban traffic jams that trap the giant diesel trucks of the monolith every single afternoon. She builds this entire revolutionary infrastructure in absolute total silence. She is bending the crossbow string. The physical tension is building. The strategic energy is storing. The arrogant executives at the monolith are still laughing at her 10 pathetic delivery trucks, completely blind to the massive avalanche hanging directly above their corporate headquarters. When the absolute peak of the winter holiday shipping season arrives, the exact moment when the global logistics grid is stretched to its absolute maximum breaking point, Sarah finally pulls the trigger. She unleashes her stored indirect energy. She officially launches her decentralized urban delivery network to the commercial public, guaranteeing a corporate delivery speed that is mathematically and physically impossible for the monolith to ever match. Because her client cargo is already hidden directly inside the city center, and because her agile couriers completely ignore standard traffic patterns, her company executes massive commercial deliveries in exactly 45 minutes. Monolith requires 2 full business days to accomplish the exact same task. The market impact is absolutely devastating and truly instantaneous. The most massive commercial clients of the city realize they can completely revolutionize their own corporate supply chains by using the lightning-fast service Sarah provides. Within exactly 1 week, 50% of the most lucrative corporate contracts in the urban center completely abandoned the monolith and sign exclusive, highly profitable agreements with Sarah. The monolith desperately tries to fight back, but their organizational energy is completely wrong. They try to deploy more massive trucks, but the giant trucks just get hopelessly trapped in the freezing holiday traffic. They try to lower their prices again, but the wealthy commercial clients do not care about the price discount anymore. They only care about the unprecedented operational speed. The monolith is entirely paralyzed because their giant, deeply predictable infrastructure cannot possibly adapt to an indirect, highly creative attack. Sarah completely conquered the most valuable territory in the global industry. She used the standard direct method to keep her massive enemy entirely comfortable and completely distracted. Then she released an unbelievable amount of stored indirect energy in a single fraction of a second, creating a terrifying physical momentum that completely shattered the legacy empire. The ultimate battle was completely won before the monolith even realized they were actually fighting a war. This brilliant and expansive case study contains a massive, completely life-changing lesson for your own daily routines and your professional career. We constantly fail in our personal conflicts and our corporate ambitions because we exclusively rely on direct methods. We argue with our partners using the exact same predictable vocabulary. We apply for elite corporate jobs using the exact same standard resumes as thousands of other desperate applicants. We negotiate our salaries using the exact same aggressive tactics everyone else uses. When you are completely predictable, your daily obstacles can easily anticipate your movements and completely block your progress. Your ultimate practical application for this chapter is to deeply audit your current approach to your absolute biggest life goals and completely separate your direct actions from your indirect strategies. If you are currently trying to secure a massive promotion at your corporate job, your direct method is showing up on time, completing your assigned daily tasks, and fulfilling your basic job description perfectly. This direct method is absolutely required. You must do this simply to stay on the board and keep management comfortable, but you will never win the ultimate prize simply by doing the expected work. You must quietly and aggressively build your indirect energy. While you are performing your standard duties flawlessly, you must spend your private evenings acquiring a rare, highly specialized technical skill that absolutely nobody else in your entire department possesses. You must quietly build incredibly strong relationships with powerful executives in completely different departments. You draw the heavy crossbow in absolute silence. You wait patiently for the exact moment when the company faces a massive, unprecedented corporate crisis that the standard, predictable employees simply cannot solve. That is the exact moment you pull the trigger. You unleash your rare technical skill. You deploy your hidden executive relationships. You solve the massive crisis in a brilliant way that nobody else even considered possible. Your ultimate promotion becomes absolutely inevitable because you attack the corporate problem from an invisible angle they never saw coming. You must become an absolute master of momentum. Do not exhaust your precious life energy with endless, highly predictable frontal assaults. Use the expected methods to firmly hold your ground, but meticulously save your true brilliance for the creative, unorthodox, and totally unexpected strike. When you finally release your stored energy, make sure the momentum is so massive and the angle is so incredibly brilliant that your ultimate victory is fully secured in a single, absolutely devastating moment. We discovered the terrifying physics of strategic momentum. We learned how to perfectly balance direct and indirect methods, holding the enemy in place with predictable actions while completely destroying them with an entirely unexpected strike. Today, we move into the absolute core of battlefield control. We are going to explore the supreme psychological dominance of taking the initiative. We are diving into Chapter 6, which focuses entirely on the brilliant concept of weak points and strong, and the absolute mastery of completely controlling the reality of your opponent. Chapter 6. The illusion of strength and the mastery of the void. Human beings naturally gravitate toward the strongest, most obvious point of conflict. When we are challenged, our absolute first instinct is to meet force entirely with force. If a massive competitor attacks our best-selling product, we immediately pour all of our money into defending that exact product. If a highly aggressive co-worker insults our intelligence in a meeting, we immediately insult them back. We constantly fight our enemies exactly where our enemies are absolutely strongest. Sun Tzu considers this instinct to be completely foolish and deeply amateur. He introduces a fundamental law of absolute victory. He states that whoever is first in the field and awaits the coming of the enemy will be fresh for the fight. Whoever is second in the field and has to hasten to battle will arrive completely exhausted. Therefore, the clever combatant absolutely imposes his will on the enemy, but does not allow the enemy will to be imposed on him. This is the ultimate definition of the initiative. If you wake up every single morning and simply react to the emails in your inbox, react to the demands of your toxic boss, and react to the marketing campaigns of your competitors, you are completely losing the war. You're arriving second to the battlefield. You're letting the enemy dictate the terms, the location, and the absolute pace of the conflict. To completely reverse this dynamic, a master strategist uses the concept of the void. Sun Tzu commands us to appear at points which the enemy must hasten to defend, and to march swiftly to places where we are not expected. You must completely avoid the heavily fortified strong points of your enemy and strike exclusively at their absolute weak points. Furthermore, Sun Tzu reveals a brilliant mathematical truth regarding massive numbers. If your enemy has a massive army and you have a very small team, you cannot fight them everywhere, but you can absolutely force them to divide their massive strength. Sun Tzu states that if you force the enemy to prepare for an attack in the front, their rear will be weak. If you force them to prepare on the left, their right will be weak. If they prepare everywhere, they will be weak absolutely everywhere. By constantly threatening multiple different vulnerable locations, you force a massive, terrifying giant to completely fragment their resources. A giant divided into 100 tiny pieces is no longer a giant. It is simply 100 tiny, incredibly vulnerable targets waiting to be dismantled. Let us transition directly into our massively detailed case study to witness this brilliant manipulation of strength and weakness executed perfectly. We will step into the incredibly high-stakes world of global corporate litigation to watch a brilliant mastermind completely exhaust a massive empire by absolutely refusing to fight them where they are strong. Case study 1. The Phantom and the Fragmented Giant. Meet Isabella. Isabella is a brilliant, highly aggressive environmental lawyer who runs a very small, deeply dedicated legal foundation. Her entire organization consists of exactly 4 junior attorneys and a handful of passionate researchers. Isabella takes on a terrifying case. A massive, deeply corrupt international mining conglomerate is attempting to illegally seize completely protected indigenous land to build a highly toxic extraction facility. We will call this massive corporate empire the Titan. The Titan possesses infinite financial resources. They have a massive legal department consisting of over 300 incredibly ruthless corporate attorneys. They have completely fortified their strong points. They have bribed local politicians. They have bought absolute silence from the local media, and they are fully prepared to completely crush Isabella in the local Supreme Court. They want her to file a massive direct lawsuit so they can use their 300 lawyers to drown her tiny team in endless, exhausting paperwork. If Isabella were an emotional amateur leader, she would march directly into the local courtroom and fight a noble, completely doomed frontal assault. She would attack their absolute strongest point. But Isabella is a master of the art of war. She understands that fighting 300 corporate lawyers in a corrupt local jurisdiction is absolute suicide. She completely refuses to arrive second to the battlefield. She refuses to let the Titan dictate the terms of the engagement. Isabella begins her campaign by completely ignoring the local courtroom. Instead, she searches for the absolute void in the armor of the enemy. She tasks her researchers with completely dissecting the massive global financial structure of the Titan. They discover a beautiful, highly vulnerable weak point. The Titan relies absolutely heavily on an international sustainability certification to maintain their incredibly lucrative contracts with massive European banks. If they lose this specific green certification, their global funding will completely evaporate overnight. This certification board is located in an entirely different country, thousands of miles away from the corrupt local politicians. Isabella strikes the void. She completely bypasses the massive legal army waiting in the local jurisdiction and fires a highly detailed, incredibly devastating official grievance directly with the International Certification Board in and Europe. He provides absolutely undeniable satellite evidence of previous toxic spills completely ignored by the Titan. The executives at the Titan completely panic. This is an attack they never expected. They are forced to immediately pull 50 of their best lawyers away from the local battle and desperately fly them to Europe to try and defend their critical certification. Isabella has forced the enemy to move. He has successfully taken the absolute initiative. But she does not stop there. The very next morning, while their legal team is completely fragmented, Isabella strikes another completely undefended weak point. She discovers that the primary public relations firm representing the Titan is secretly planning a massive global merger. Isabella quietly leaks a completely factual, highly damaging report regarding the unethical practices of the Titan directly to the corporate rivals of that public relations firm. The rival firms immediately use the information to publicly humiliate the PR agency. The PR agency panics and officially drops the Titan as a client to save their own merger. The Titan is now bleeding from two completely unexpected wounds. They must divert another massive group of executives to completely rebuild their global public relations strategy. They are completely scrambling to react to her movements. They are arriving late to every single battle. Isabella continues the completely relentless campaign of striking the void. She initiates a highly localized union strike at a completely different mining facility owned by the Titan on the opposite side of the continent. She organizes a massive consumer boycott against the specific technology companies that purchase the raw materials from the Titan. She forces the massive empire to defend the front, defend the rear, defend the left, and defend the right. Because the Titan is absolutely terrified of losing their global empire, they divide their 300 ruthless lawyers into dozens of tiny, highly stressed, completely exhausted micro teams scattered across the entire planet. They prepare absolutely everywhere, and therefore they become completely weak everywhere. After exactly 6 months of completely exhausting the enemy, the local politicians who originally supported the Titan become deeply terrified. They see the massive global humiliation of the corporation. They see the completely fragmented legal team. The political strongpoint completely crumbles from the inside out. Isabella finally walks into the local courtroom, but she does not face an army of 300 rested, confident lawyers. She faces a tiny handful of completely exhausted, deeply demoralized junior attorneys who have completely lost the support of their own executive board. The victory is absolutely swift and completely decisive. The local judge, sensing the massive shift in global power, officially denies the land seizure permits and permanently protects the indigenous territory. Isabella completely destroyed an invincible global giant by absolutely refusing to fight their strength and completely exploiting their endless vulnerabilities. This massive and brilliant case study provides an incredibly powerful blueprint for completely dominating your own personal and professional conflicts. The absolute greatest mistake you can make in your daily life is repeatedly fighting your enemies on their absolute best territory. If you have a highly toxic, incredibly charismatic coworker who constantly insults you in public meetings, you will never win by trying to insult them back. Public charm is their absolute strong point. You must strike their void. Their weak point is likely their complete lack of actual documented daily productivity. You simply ignore their public insults entirely, and you quietly provide upper management with completely undeniable, mathematically perfect spreadsheets proving that you are doing absolutely all of the actual work. You strike where they have zero defense. Your practical application for this chapter is to completely audit your current approach to conflict and absolutely seize the initiative. Stop waking up every single morning and simply reacting to the demands of a chaotic world. When you face an obstacle, deeply analyze the architecture of your opponent. Where are they incredibly strong? Completely avoid that area. Where are they completely unprepared, lazy, or overly confident? That specific void is your exact target. You must dictate the pace of the game. Make your competitors react to your brilliant innovations. Make your toxic rivals constantly scramble to defend their own forgotten mistakes. When you master the art of striking the void, you completely bypass the exhausting struggle of the frontal assault. You move like water, completely flowing around the heavy rocks, exploiting every single crack in the system, and eventually washing away the absolute foundations of any giant foolish enough to stand in your path. We discovered the absolute supremacy of taking the initiative. We learn how to strike the void, avoiding the heavily fortified strong points of our opponent and forcing them to completely fragment their massive strength until they became incredibly vulnerable absolutely everywhere. Today, we step into the most highly complex and physically dangerous phase of any campaign. We must explore the physical movement of your resources and the terrifying logistics of positioning yourself for the final strike. This brings us to chapter 7 of the ancient text, focusing entirely on the profound complexities of maneuvering and the ultimate danger of the direct march. Chapter 7. The illusion of the shortcut and the devious route. Human beings are biologically wired to desire the fastest, most direct path to their goals. When we see an objective, we want to march in a completely straight line directly toward it. If we want a corporate promotion, we march directly into the office of the executive and demand it. If we want to capture a new market, we launch a massive, highly aggressive advertising campaign directly at the consumer. We believe that speed and directness are the absolute keys to success. Sun Tzu shatters this modern illusion with a brilliant and deeply counterintuitive truth. He states that in war there is absolutely nothing more difficult than tactical maneuvering. The supreme difficulty of tactical maneuvering consists in turning the devious into the straight and turning misfortune into absolute gain. He offers a massive, terrifying warning regarding the direct march. If you march a completely fully equipped army in order to snatch an advantage, the chances are that you will be too late. The heavy baggage, the massive logistics, and the endless supplies will slow you down. However, if you detach a highly mobile flying column in order to snatch an advantage, your massive equipment and your vital supply lines will be left behind, leaving you completely vulnerable to total annihilation. The direct path is an absolute trap. It looks like the fastest way to win, but it completely exhausts your energy, stretches your resources to the absolute breaking point, and leaves your vital organs completely exposed to the enemy. Therefore, a master of maneuvering never takes the obvious, direct shortcut. They take the devious route. They take the long, highly calculated, incredibly quiet path around the massive obstacles. They use the art of deception to make the enemy believe they are entirely lost or completely inactive. They entice the enemy out of their comfortable fortress by offering an illusion of an advantage, and then they strike from an angle the enemy never even considered. The devious route ultimately becomes the absolute fastest route to total victory. Furthermore, Sun Tzu introduces a critical component of successful maneuvering. Once your forces are perfectly positioned, they must operate as a single, terrifyingly unified organism. In ancient times, this was achieved through the use of massive gongs, heavy drums, and highly visible signaling banners. The drums and banners were completely necessary because in the absolute chaos and deafening noise of a massive battle, verbal commands are completely useless. Sun Tzu states that the host thus forms a single united body. Is it impossible either for the brave to advance alone or for the cowardly to retreat alone? This is the ultimate art of handling large masses of men. If your team is not completely unified by a single communication system and a single vision, your brilliant maneuver will completely fall apart the very second the actual conflict begins. Let us transition directly into our single, massively expansive case study to witness this brilliant maneuvering executed perfectly. We will step into the incredibly high-stakes world of modern political strategy to watch a master tactician completely dismantle a massive, incredibly wealthy lobbying syndicate by totally refusing to take the direct path. Case study 1. The Invisible March and the Unified Chorus. Meet Elias. Elias is a brilliant, highly calculating campaign strategist who works for a deeply dedicated environmental coalition. His ultimate objective is to pass a revolutionary clean water and agricultural sustainability mandate in a massive, highly populated state. Passing this mandate is an incredibly dangerous mission. The opposition is a massive industrial agricultural syndicate. We will call this massive corporate empire the Syndicate. The Syndicate possesses hundreds of millions of dollars in highly liquid lobbying funds. They have completely fortified the state capital. They own the local television networks. They have purchased the loyalty of the major politicians, and they are fully prepared to completely crush Elias and his tiny grassroots coalition. The Syndicate expects Elias to take the direct march. They expect him to bring his small group of activists directly to the state capital to protest loudly on the steps of the government buildings. They expect him to spend his tiny budget on direct television advertisements in the major cities, trying to fight their massive advertising budget in a completely doomed frontal assault. If Elias took this direct path, he would be completely destroyed. His resources would evaporate in exactly 1 week, and his team would be completely exhausted by the massive legal and financial resistance of the syndicate. Elias studies the art of war. He understands the absolute danger of the direct march. He completely ignores the state capital. He completely abandons the major metropolitan cities. He takes the devious route. Elias physically relocates his entire core team to the deeply rural, highly isolated agricultural counties located hundreds of miles away from the heavily fortified capital. These are the areas that the arrogant executives at the syndicate completely ignore because they assume they already own the rural vote. Elias uses the brilliant concept of turning misfortune into absolute gain. The rural counties are currently suffering from a terrible, highly destructive drought. This is the misfortune. Elias does not march into their towns preaching about massive global climate initiatives because that language does not resonate with their immediate survival. Instead, he speaks exclusively about securing their local water rights, protecting their family farms, and stopping the massive industrial corporations from stealing their vital natural resources. He quietly maneuvers through the forgotten spaces. He holds tiny, highly private meetings in local community centers, church basements, and rural diners. He builds massive trust by completely listening to their absolute deepest fears. While he is maneuvering through the rural void, Elias perfectly executes the ancient concept of the gongs and the banners. He knows that his massive rural coalition will be completely useless if they cannot act as a single, highly unified organism when the final vote approaches. He does not rely on chaotic email chains or disorganized social media groups. Elias uses his limited budget to completely develop a custom, highly encrypted, incredibly simple digital application for his entire rural coalition. This application becomes his absolute signaling banner. It provides perfectly synchronized daily talking points to every single member. It tells them exactly which local representative to call on which specific day and provides the exact script they must use. For 8 completely silent months, Elias builds his massive army in the shadows. He completely unifies tens of thousands of rural voters into a single, terrifyingly organized political machine. The syndicate is completely blind to this massive maneuver because Elias took the devious route and entirely avoided the major cities. The expensive corporate spies and highly paid lobbyists working for the syndicate report that the environmental campaign is completely inactive and entirely dead. The syndicate becomes incredibly comfortable and deeply arrogant. The exact week of the final legislative vote arrives. The syndicate expects a completely effortless victory. Elias finally pulls the trigger and unleashes the unified organism. He sends a single, highly coordinated alert through his custom digital application. In exactly one morning, tens of thousands of rural voters absolutely flood the telephone lines of every single state representative. They completely swarm the local municipal offices. They speak with one absolutely unified, highly terrifying voice, demanding the immediate passage of the clean water mandate. The state politicians completely panic. They do not care about the corporate money of the syndicate if it costs them their actual seats in the upcoming election. The politicians immediately realize that Elias has completely captured their entire voting base. The syndicate desperately tries to launch a massive, highly expensive television advertising campaign to regain control of the narrative, but they are completely too late. Their heavy baggage of corporate bureaucracy and slow approval processes makes them incredibly sluggish. They are completely outmaneuvered by the lightning-fast, highly unified grassroots machine that Elias built in absolute silence. The revolutionary mandate passes with an absolute overwhelming majority. Elias completely destroyed a corporate giant with infinite financial resources. He did this by completely refusing the obvious, direct shortcut. He took the long, devious route through the rural counties, turning a massive local misfortune into a brilliant strategic gain. He unified his forces perfectly, ensuring that nobody advanced alone and nobody retreated alone. He turned the longest, most difficult path into the absolute fastest route to total victory. This magnificent case study holds a deeply profound lesson for your own corporate ambitions and your personal life. We are constantly seduced by the illusion of the shortcut. We buy aggressive marketing software hoping for instant overnight sales. We launch aggressive public arguments hoping to instantly change the mind of a toxic family member. We constantly charge directly at the fortified walls of our absolute biggest problems, and we are constantly thrown backward, completely bruised and entirely exhausted. Your ultimate practical application for this chapter is to completely abandon the direct march. When you identify a massive goal, you must absolutely resist the urge to sprint directly toward it. You must map out the devious route. If you want to secure a highly exclusive corporate partnership, do not send a completely aggressive, desperate email directly to the chief executive officer. That is a direct march, and your email will simply be deleted. Take the devious route. Quietly build an incredibly strong professional relationship with their middle management team. Provide massive, uncompensated value to their peripheral vendors. Build a massive web of undeniable influence around the chief executive officer so that when you finally request a meeting, they already deeply respect your reputation. Furthermore, you must audit your own internal comms and banners. Are you acting as a single, unified organism in your professional life? Does your business team have a flawless communication system, or is everyone constantly operating on entirely different assumptions? You must completely eliminate internal chaos. Before you execute a massive maneuver, ensure your entire team moves entirely as one. Master the devious route. Embrace the quiet, invisible path around the massive obstacles. Secure your communications, build your influence in the shadows, and completely outmaneuver your enemies before they even realize the battle has officially begun. We learned how to take the devious route, outmaneuvering our enemies in complete silence and unifying our forces into a single, terrifyingly efficient organism. Today, we confront the absolute greatest weakness of the highly intelligent mind. We are going to explore the catastrophic danger of the rigid plan. We are stepping into chapter 8 of the ancient text, focusing entirely on the 9 variations of tactics, the absolute necessity of supreme flexibility, and the 5 fatal flaws of leadership. Chapter 8. The architecture of flexibility and the disobedient general. Human beings find massive psychological comfort in strict rules and rigid plans. When we face a chaotic universe, we write detailed 5-year business plans. We create strict daily schedules. We build massive corporate policies. We believe that if we simply follow the established rules and execute the original plan perfectly, we will automatically secure a total victory. Sun Tzu completely shatters this comforting illusion. He states that the general who does not understand the 9 variations of tactics may be well acquainted with the features of the country. yet he would not be able to turn his knowledge to practical account. A rigid plan is a completely dead document. The absolute second your plan collides with a highly chaotic, unpredictable enemy, the plan becomes entirely worthless. If you refuse to adapt, if you stubbornly stick to your original strategy, or the environment radically changes around you, you are marching your army directly off a massive cliff. To achieve supreme flexibility, Sun Tzu introduces a terrifying and highly controversial concept. He states that there are roads which must not be followed, armies which must not be attacked, towns which must not be besieged, positions which must not be contested, and commands of the sovereign which must not be obeyed. This final variation is the most deeply profound. The sovereign represents the absolute highest authority. In ancient times, it was the emperor. In the modern world, the sovereign is your corporate board of directors, your incredibly demanding boss, or the strict cultural expectations of your society. Sun Tzu dictates that if the command of the sovereign leads to total destruction, the master general must absolutely disobey the direct order. Loyalty to the ultimate victory is infinitely more important than blind obedience to a foolish authority figure. Furthermore, Sun Tzu warns that a leader unable to adapt usually suffers from one of the 5 dangerous faults. You must completely eradicate these flaws from your own psychology. The first fault is absolute recklessness, which leads directly to destruction. This is the leader who attacks blindly out of pure ego. The second fault is cowardice, which leads to capture. This is the leader who is completely paralyzed by the fear of making a mistake. The third fault is a hasty temper, which can be easily provoked by cheap insults. The fourth fault is the delicacy of honor, which means the leader is so terrified of public shame that they will fight a completely doomed battle just to save their own reputation. The fifth and final fault is an over-solicitude for his men, which exposes the leader to endless worry and completely paralyzes their objective decision-making process. A master strategist possesses absolutely none of these faults. They are completely fluid, deeply objective, and entirely willing to break every single rule and disobey every single authority figure if the environment demands a radical pivot. Let us transition directly into our massively detailed case study to witness this brilliant flexibility executed perfectly. We will step into the incredibly high-stakes world of global maritime shipping to watch a brilliant executive completely disobey her absolute highest authority in order to save an entire corporate empire from total annihilation. Case study 1. The fluid commander and the dying market meet Sophia. Sophia is the brilliant chief operations officer for a massive, heavily established global shipping logistics corporation. Her company operates a massive fleet of deep-sea cargo vessels. They have built their entire multi-billion-dollar empire on one highly specific strategy. For 40 continuous years, they have completely dominated the global retail logistics market, moving millions of shipping containers filled with consumer electronics and cheap retail clothing across the ocean. The sovereign of this corporate empire is the completely rigid board of directors. These executives are deeply old, highly arrogant, and completely terrified of change. They built their massive fortunes on the retail shipping routes, and they view those specific routes as their absolute sacred territory. A massive, unprecedented global economic crisis suddenly strikes. Consumer spending absolutely plummets. Retail stores across the globe begin declaring total bankruptcy. The demand for retail shipping completely evaporates virtually overnight. The rigid board of directors completely panics. They suffer heavily from the fourth dangerous fault, which is the delicacy of honor. They are completely terrified of looking weak to their corporate shareholders. They refuse to accept that their beloved retail market is entirely dead. The board of directors issues a direct absolute mandate to Sophia. They command her to launch a massive, incredibly expensive price war against their remaining shipping competitors. They order her to completely slash their shipping rates and send the entire global fleet to the retail manufacturing hubs to aggressively fight for the tiny fraction of retail cargo that still remains in the dying market. Sophia studies the ancient texts. She completely understands the 9 variations. She realizes that the dying retail market is a town which must not be besieged. It is an army which must not be attacked. Fighting a massive, highly expensive price war over a completely empty market is absolute corporate suicide. If Sophia were a standard, rigid employee, she would blindly obey the sovereign. She would execute the terrible plan, watch the company go completely bankrupt, and then blame the board of directors for the ultimate failure. But Sophia is a master strategist. She understands that the command of the sovereign must absolutely not be obeyed. Sophia conducts a massive, highly secretive analysis of the changing global environment. She discovers a beautiful, entirely uncontested void in the market. While the retail sector is completely dying, massive global governments are pouring trillions of dollars into building completely new renewable energy grids. There is an absolutely desperate, incredibly lucrative demand for ships capable of transporting massive wind turbine blades and heavy solar infrastructure across the ocean. Sophia makes makes the terrifying decision to completely defy her absolute highest authority. She does not argue with the board of directors because arguing with a rigid mind is a complete waste of precious energy. She simply nods her head in the boardroom, offering the absolute illusion of compliance. The very second she leaves the boardroom, Sophia executes the most massive corporate pivot in the history of the industry. She completely intercepts the navigational orders for the entire global fleet. She does not send a single ship to the dying retail manufacturing hubs. Instead, she secretly diverts her massive cargo vessels to the emerging industrial ports that manufacture renewable energy infrastructure. She authorizes massive, highly expensive structural modifications to the ships while they are literally in transit, adapting their cargo bays to hold massive wind turbines instead of standard retail containers. For 3 terrifying weeks, she operates in total silence. She risks her entire corporate career, her professional reputation, and her complete financial future. She must remain completely stoic, completely ignoring the dangerous fault of cowardice. When the quarterly financial reports are finally published, the truth is entirely exposed to the world. The competitors who rigidly followed the old rules and fought the massive price war in the retail sector are completely devastated. They report billions of dollars in catastrophic losses. The board of directors calls Sophia into a massive emergency meeting. They are completely furious. They realize she entirely disobeyed their direct corporate mandate. They scream at her, threatening to fire her and completely ruin her professional reputation for gross insubordination. Sophia remains perfectly calm. She does not suffer from a hasty temper. She simply slides a completely pristine, mathematically undeniable financial document across the massive mahogany table. While every single competitor went completely bankrupt fighting over a dying retail market, Sophia completely captured the entire global monopoly on renewable energy shipping. Because she was the absolutely first to arrive in the completely new market, she dictated her own exorbitant prices. Her massive fleet is fully booked for the next 10 consecutive years. She completely replaced the dying retail revenue with a massive, entirely unprecedented wave of new global profits. The angry screaming in the boardroom completely stops. The absolute silence is incredibly heavy. The board of directors realizes that her complete disobedience is the absolutely only reason their corporate empire still exists. They cannot fire her. They are completely dependent on her brilliant strategic vision. Sophia secured a total absolute victory because she refused to be a slave to a rigid plan. She recognized the road that must not be followed, and she possessed the absolute supreme courage to disobey a foolish authority figure to save the ultimate mission. This beautiful and highly expansive case study holds an incredibly profound lesson for your own daily existence. We are constantly trapped by our own rigid expectations. We stay in terrible, highly toxic romantic relationships because we already spent 5 years planning a future together and we are completely terrified of changing the plan. We stay in miserable corporate careers because we rigidly follow the advice of our parents and we suffer from a delicacy of honor, terrified of the public shame of starting over. Your ultimate practical application for this chapter is to completely audit your life for strategic rigidity. Where are you currently attacking a walled city that holds absolutely no value? Where are you blindly following the commands of a toxic boss or a completely outdated social expectation that is leading you directly into absolute misery? You must become entirely fluid. You must view your plans as completely temporary tools, not absolute religious doctrines. If a massive opportunity suddenly appears on a devious route, you must absolutely abandon your original straight path and pivot your entire life instantly. Eradicate the 5 dangerous faults from your psychology. Stop worrying about public shame, stop acting out of reckless anger, and stop letting fear paralyze your brilliant maneuvers. When you combine absolute tactical discipline with total environmental flexibility, you become a completely unstoppable force of nature. We learn how to remain completely fluid, adapting to the chaotic environment and possessing the supreme courage to completely disobey a foolish authority figure to secure the ultimate victory. Today we transition from the architecture of flexibility into the terrifying reality of active observation. We are stepping into chapter 9 of the ancient text, focusing entirely on the army on the march, the absolute necessity of environmental awareness, and the brilliant psychological art of reading the hidden signs of the enemy. Chapter 9. The army on the march and the theater of illusion. Human beings are completely obsessed with the spoken word. We believe exactly what we are told. If a massive corporation releases a beautiful press statement claiming they are highly profitable, we believe the statement. If a highly toxic individual looks us deeply in the eyes and promises they will absolutely change their behavior, we believe the promise. We base our entire reality on the verbal theater presented by our opponents. Sun Tzu considers this reliance on spoken words to be a fatal strategic vulnerability. He understands that absolute deception is the absolute foundation of all warfare. Therefore, you must assume that every single word your enemy speaks is a calculated lie designed to completely blind you. If you cannot trust words, what can you trust? You must trust the environment. You must trust the absolute physical reality of the marching army. Sun Tzu spends the majority of this chapter outlining exactly how to read the hidden signs of the natural world. He provides brilliant, highly specific ancient examples. He states that if birds suddenly take flight from a completely silent forest, there is a massive ambush waiting in the trees. If you see a high, sharp column of dust rising in the distance, it means enemy chariots are advancing rapidly. If you see dust hanging low and completely spread out, it means massive columns of infantry are marching toward you. But the most profound psychological lessons come from his observation of human behavior under massive pressure. Sun Tzu writes that if the envoys of the enemy speak in humble terms, but the enemy continues to increase their physical preparations, they are absolutely planning to attack. Conversely, if the enemy speaks in highly aggressive, violent terms and makes a massive show of advancing, they are actually preparing to retreat. If there is a massive disturbance and shouting in the enemy camp at night, it proves that the opposing general has completely lost his authority and his soldiers are terrified. In the modern world, this is the absolute mastery of environmental warfare. You must stop listening to the beautiful presentations and start looking at the dust. People can completely control the words coming out of their mouths, but it is physically and psychologically impossible for a massive organization or a deeply deceptive individual to completely hide the physical signs of their true intentions. The truth always leaks into the environment. Let us transition directly into our single, massively expansive case study to witness this brilliant observation executed perfectly. We will step into the incredibly high-stakes world of global corporate acquisitions to watch a brilliant mastermind completely expose a massive fraud simply by refusing to listen to the words and choosing entirely to watch the birds. Case study 1. The Silent Watcher and the Hollow Mountain meet David. David is a brilliant, highly calculating risk analyst working for a massive billion-dollar investment firm. His firm is currently preparing to execute the absolute largest corporate acquisition in its entire history. They want to purchase a highly celebrated, completely revolutionary technology startup. We will call this massive target the Mirage. The Mirage is the absolute darling of the global technology press. They claim to have developed a completely revolutionary artificial intelligence software that will entirely disrupt the global logistics industry. The chief executive officer of the Mirage is incredibly charismatic, highly attractive, and completely mesmerizing on a public stage. The investment firm of David sends a massive team of accountants to review the financial documents of the Mirage. The documents are absolutely flawless. The revenue projections are incredibly massive. The profit margins are entirely unprecedented, based entirely on the written words and the beautiful financial spreadsheets. The board of directors demands that David approve the massive acquisition immediately, but David studies the art of war. He understands the theater of illusion. He knows that financial spreadsheets can be entirely fabricated. He refuses to approve the massive acquisition until he physically marches his own army into their territory. He insists on spending exactly 1 week physically working inside the corporate headquarters of the Mirage. The charismatic chief executive officer of the Mirage enthusiastically agrees, promising David absolute transparency. When David arrives at the massive, beautifully designed glass headquarters, the executive team immediately attempts to completely control his reality. They usher him into a beautiful conference room. They serve him incredibly expensive catered meals. They present massive, beautifully designed slideshows detailing their glorious future. They speak in incredibly humble terms, telling David how honored they are to join his massive investment firm. David completely ignores the slideshows. He completely ignores the humble words. He leaves the conference room and begins to quietly walk the physical halls of the company. He is looking for the rising dust. He is looking for the startled birds. On the very first day, David walks through the massive employee parking garage at exactly 5 o'clock in the evening. In a truly revolutionary, highly passionate technology startup, the brilliant engineers usually work late into the night, deeply obsessed with their revolutionary product. But David observes that the parking garage is empty by 5:15. The employees are fleeing the building the absolute second their massive shift concludes. This is a massive environmental sign of completely broken corporate morale. On the second day, David quietly observes the behavior of the middle management team in the corporate cafeteria. The charismatic chief executive officer told David that the corporate culture was incredibly unified and highly peaceful. But David watches the middle managers. They are incredibly jumpy. They speak to each other in furious, hushed whispers. When a senior executive walks into the room, the middle managers completely freeze in absolute terror. Sun Tzu taught David that massive disturbance and fear in the ranks prove the general is deeply tyrannical and the culture is completely toxic. On the third day, David executes a brilliant, completely unexpected maneuver. He asks to speak directly with the lead software engineer, the genius who supposedly wrote the revolutionary artificial intelligence code. The charismatic chief executive officer suddenly becomes incredibly aggressive. He loudly insists that the lead engineer is completely busy and cannot be disturbed. The chief executive officer raises his voice, attempting to intimidate David into backing down. David remembers the ancient rule. When the enemy speaks in highly aggressive terms and makes a massive show of force, they are completely terrified and actively retreating. The aggression is a massive shield to hide a terrifying vulnerability. David completely ignores the intimidation. He quietly bypasses the executive suite and locates the desk of the lead software engineer. The desk is empty. It has been empty for weeks. David casually asks the junior janitor where the brilliant engineer went. The janitor casually mentions that the lead engineer quietly resigned over a month ago, completely terrified of massive legal liabilities. David has seen absolutely enough. The physical environment completely contradicts the beautiful financial spreadsheets. The company is completely hollow. David returns to his massive investment firm and drops a completely devastating report on the mahogany table of the board of directors. He completely refuses to authorize the acquisition. He outlines the empty parking garage, the terrified middle management, the aggressive defensiveness of the executive, and the completely missing lead engineer. He proves that the Mirage is not a revolutionary technology company. It is a massive, empty theater production designed exclusively to steal their billions of dollars before the completely broken software is finally exposed to the public. The board of directors is completely furious. They want the massive acquisition. They yell at David, accusing him of being overly paranoid and ruining a massive global opportunity. But David stands completely firm. He absolutely refuses to bend. He saves his firm from the direct march into a massive ambush. Exactly 3 months later, the absolute truth finally shatters the global market. A massive federal investigation violently raids the glass headquarters of the Mirage. The charismatic chief executive officer is immediately arrested for completely fabricating every single line of their financial spreadsheets. The revolutionary artificial intelligence software completely failed to actually exist. The massive investment firm of David realizes that his brilliant environmental observation completely saved them from absolute total financial annihilation. The rival investment firm that ignored the dust and blindly bought the hollow mountain was destroyed, losing absolutely all of its capital and facing massive federal scrutiny. David secured an absolute victory because he completely understood that the environment never lies. He ignored the beautiful presentation and watched the terrified soldiers. This deeply profound case study provides an incredibly urgent practical application for your own daily existence. You must completely change the way you evaluate the people and the massive opportunities in your life. We are constantly blinded by the theater of illusion. We listen to the beautiful apologies of a highly toxic romantic partner, completely ignoring the absolute physical reality that they continue to destroy our emotional peace every single week. We listen to a massive corporation promise incredibly rapid career advancement, completely ignoring the massive environmental sign that every single senior manager in the building looks entirely exhausted and deeply miserable. The ultimate practical application for this chapter is to completely silence the verbal dialogue in your mind. Turn off the volume of the world. Stop listening to the promises, the excuses, and the beautiful presentations. Start watching the physical movement of the army. Look at how people actually spend their physical time. Look at how they actually allocate their financial resources. Look at the micro expressions on their faces when they are challenged. If a colleague promises they are completely dedicated to a massive project, but their physical calendar is empty of project meetings and they leave the office early every single day, their physical movement is telling you the absolute truth. The words are a lie. You must become a silent watcher. Read the dust. Notice the birds taking flight. When the physical environment completely contradicts the spoken narrative, you must trust the environment absolutely every single time. When you master the brilliant art of reading the hidden signs, you become completely immune to manipulation, completely immune to corporate fraud, and absolutely untouchable in the theater of human conflict. We learned how to read the dust, watch the birds, and completely expose the hidden truths of the environment. Today, we take that environmental awareness to the absolute highest possible level. We are stepping into chapter 10 of the ancient text, focusing entirely on the profound concept of terrain, the 6 fatal calamities of leadership, and the ultimate danger of fighting on the wrong ground. Chapter 10. The anatomy of terrain and the entangling ground. In modern society, we rarely think about the actual ground beneath our feet because we live in a digital, highly connected world. We believe that absolute sheer willpower and massive financial resources can overcome any obstacle in any location. We assume that a brilliant corporate executive can succeed in absolutely any industry, or that a passionate relationship can survive in an entirely toxic environment. Sun Tzu destroys this arrogant assumption. He dictates that the physical and psychological terrain you choose to fight on will ultimately decide your entire fate, completely regardless of how brave or wealthy you are. He identifies 6 highly specific types of terrain and provides an absolute rule for navigating every single one. The first terrain is accessible ground. This is a market or a physical location that both you and your enemy can easily enter and exit. In this environment, the master strategist absolutely must arrive first and occupy the highest, most visible and most secure position before the enemy even realizes the battle has begun. The second terrain is entangling ground. This is the most dangerous psychological terrain in the modern world. Entangling ground is an environment that is incredibly easy to enter, but absolutely impossible to exit without suffering massive damage. If you attack on an entangling ground and completely win, you might survive. But if you attack and fail, you are entirely trapped, and absolute ruin is the only possible outcome. The third terrain is temporizing ground. This is a stalemate location. It is a market or a negotiation where neither side can gain a clear advantage by making the first move. If the enemy offers you a massive temptation to enter temporizing ground, you must completely ignore the bait, turn away, and force the enemy to make the fatal first step. The fourth terrain is the narrow pass. This is a highly restricted, incredibly difficult bottleneck. If you occupy a narrow pass first, you must strongly garrison the entrance and wait patiently for the enemy to try to squeeze through. If the enemy occupies the pass first, you must absolutely never attack them. The fifth terrain is precipitous heights. This is the absolute moral and physical high ground. You must climb it first. If the enemy climbs it first, you must entirely retreat and refuse to fight them on their superior terms. The sixth terrain is positions at a great distance. If you and your enemy are completely matched in strength, but separated by a massive physical or cultural distance, provoking a battle is completely foolish. The massive logistics of crossing the distance will completely exhaust your army before the fight even begins. Beyond the terrain itself, Sun Tzu identifies 6 ultimate calamities that can destroy an army from the inside out. These calamities are flight, insubordination, collapse, ruin, disorganization, and rout. The most terrifying aspect of these 6 calamities is that they are never the fault of the terrain, and they are never the fault of the enemy. They are entirely the fault of the general. If a leader lacks absolute authority, gives completely unclear instructions, or fails to properly calculate the strength of the enemy, the leader will personally completely destroy their own empire. Let us transition directly into our single, massively expansive case study to witness this brilliant mastery of terrain executed perfectly. We will step into the incredibly complex, highly restricted world of international medical technology to watch a mastermind destroy a global giant by occupying the ultimate narrow pass. Case study 1. The Sentinel and the Lethal Bottleneck. Meet Thomas. Thomas is a brilliant software engineer who decides to build a completely new data management platform. He wants his platform to handle the most sensitive, highly protected information on the entire planet, which is international patient medical records. The medical data industry is the ultimate modern example of the narrow pass. The federal regulations are incredibly brutal. The privacy laws require absolute, flawless mathematical encryption. The bureaucratic approval process takes years of agonizing and deeply expensive audits. Because the pass is so incredibly narrow and difficult to navigate, almost every massive technology company completely avoids it, choosing instead to fight on the accessible ground of standard consumer applications. Thomas understands the ancient wisdom of the art of war. He knows that if he can survive the brutal journey and occupy the narrow pass first, he will become completely invincible. For 4 absolute grueling years, Thomas works in total silence. He does not spend a single dollar on public marketing. He pours his entire massive venture capital fund into securing the absolute highest level of federal compliance certifications in North America and Europe. He builds a flawless, impenetrable digital fortress perfectly aligned with the incredibly strict government regulations. He successfully occupies the narrow pass, heavily fortifying his position with ironclad federal batons and exclusive government approvals. Suddenly, the global landscape completely shifts. A massive international technology conglomerate decides they want to completely dominate the healthcare sector. We will call this absolutely massive empire the Colossus. The Colossus is incredibly arrogant. They possess hundreds of billions of dollars in liquid cash. They have tens of thousands of aggressive developers. They are completely accustomed to fighting on accessible ground, where they simply use their massive wealth to crush any smaller competitor through brute force advertising and endless price wars. The arrogant executives at the Colossus look at the medical data market. They see Thomas and his incredibly small company sitting at the entrance of the market. The Colossus decides to launch a massive, full frontal assault. They want to destroy Thomas and steal his entire market share in a single financial quarter. If Thomas were fighting on accessible ground, he would be annihilated in exactly 1 week. But Thomas is not on accessible ground. He is standing securely inside the heavily fortified narrow pass. The Colossus launches its massive new medical software globally. They spend billions of dollars on incredible television advertisements. They hire massive celebrity endorsements. They attempt to squeeze their incredibly bloated, highly massive corporate software directly through the incredibly tight bottleneck of international medical regulation. It is an absolute unmitigated disaster. Because the Colossus rushed their development to aggressively attack Thomas, they completely failed to achieve the necessary federal privacy certifications. They assumed their massive political lobbying power could simply bypass the strict regulations. They were completely wrong. The very week their massive software goes live, a terrifying wave of international government audits slams completely into the Colossus. Federal regulators discover massive, horrifying security flaws in their consumer-grade encryption. The European Union immediately files a completely devastating multi-billion-dollar lawsuit against the conglomerate for catastrophic privacy violations. The North American federal authorities officially ban the software from being used in any licensed hospital on the continent. The Colossus is completely trapped in the narrow pass. Their massive size, which was their absolute greatest weapon on accessible ground, becomes their ultimate weakness in the bottleneck. They cannot pivot quickly enough to fix the massive encryption failures. Their global stock price completely plummets. The incredibly arrogant executives are publicly fired in absolute disgrace. Meanwhile, Thomas simply watches the destruction from the safety of his heavily fortified position. He did not have to spend a single dollar on aggressive marketing. He did not have to fight a massive corporate price war. He simply occupied the narrow pass first, built absolute flawless compliance, and waited for the arrogant giant to try to squeeze through the lethal bottleneck. When the dust finally settles, the massive hospitals that desperately need secure data management have absolutely nowhere else to turn. Thomas is the only surviving entity inside the pass. The massive corporate clients completely abandon the ruined remains of the Colossus and sign massive, incredibly lucrative exclusive contracts with Thomas. He completely captured the entire global monopoly without ever launching a single offensive strike. He achieved an absolute total victory because he perfectly understood the terrain. He knew that the massive regulations were not an obstacle. They were a beautiful, impenetrable wall that he could use to completely crush his incredibly wealthy enemies. This deeply profound case study provides an incredibly urgent practical application for your own daily existence and your corporate career. You must completely analyze the terrain of your own life. We constantly fail because we unknowingly step onto entangling ground. Think about the massive, highly toxic arguments you witness on public social media platforms. Entering a massive public argument with a stranger on the internet is the absolute definition of entangling ground. It is incredibly easy to type an angry comment and join the battle, but it is absolutely impossible to win the argument or exit the situation with your emotional peace intact. You simply become completely exhausted. Your reputation is entirely damaged, and you gain absolutely no strategic advantage. A master strategist completely refuses to fight on entangling ground. Furthermore, you must actively seek out the narrow passes in your own professional industry, the tasks that everyone else complains about, the incredibly difficult certifications that nobody wants to study for, and the highly complex bureaucratic processes that terrify your lazy co-workers are your absolute greatest opportunities. Do not fight on the accessible ground where absolutely everyone can easily compete with you. Move toward the absolute hardest problems in your company. Spend the agonizing hours required to secure the most difficult skills. Occupy the narrow pass. When the massive economic recessions arrive, or when highly aggressive new employees try to take your corporate position, they will be completely unable to navigate the strict requirements of your incredibly complex role. They will completely shatter against your fortified walls, and your immense value to the organization will become entirely undeniable. You must become an absolute master of the ground beneath your feet. Never allow the enemy to force you into an environment where your specific strengths are completely neutralized. Control the terrain, and you completely control the entire outcome of the war. We are exploring chapter 11, which is known entirely as the 9 situations. In our previous chapter, we looked closely at physical terrain and the massive danger of fighting on the wrong ground. Today, we look strictly at the psychological ground. Sun Tzu explains that the psychological state of your army completely changes depending on how deep they are inside enemy territory and how close they are to absolute destruction. A massive force can easily become completely cowardly if they are positioned incorrectly, while a tiny, exhausted team can fight with the absolute power of immortal gods if they are placed in the correct psychological state. Sun Tzu defines exactly 9 varieties of ground. We must deeply understand every single one to master the human mind. The first is dispersive ground. This is when a leader fights completely inside their own home territory. Sun Tzu states that on dispersive ground you must absolutely never fight. Why? Because your team is entirely too close to their own comfort. When soldiers fight near their own homes, their minds are completely divided. They are constantly thinking about their families, their soft beds, and their comfortable lives. At the very first sign of severe danger, their psychological instinct will be to scatter and run home to absolute safety. The second is facile ground. This occurs when you have entered hostile territory, but you have not penetrated deeply. Your forces are barely across the border. In this situation, the psychological commitment of your team is incredibly weak. They know that retreat is incredibly easy. Sun Tzu warns that you must never stop and rest on facile ground, because a resting mind will quickly convince itself to simply turn around and walk away from the massive challenge. The third is contentious ground. This is a highly strategic location that offers a massive, undeniable advantage to whoever occupies it first. Sun Tzu offers a strict rule for contentious ground. If the enemy occupies it first, you must absolutely never attack. You must use massive deception to completely entice the enemy away from their perfect position. The fourth is open ground. This is an environment where both sides have absolute freedom of movement. Your forces can easily march forward, and the enemy can easily maneuver around you. The rule for open ground is to absolutely never allow your formations to be broken. You must keep your team incredibly tight and entirely unified, completely preventing the enemy from slipping through your defensive lines. The fifth is the ground of intersecting highways. This is the absolute center of communication for the entire region. It is the territory that directly connects multiple neutral powers. He who occupies this incredibly valuable ground completely controls the alliances of the entire continent. Sun Tzu commands that on this ground you must absolutely join hands with your allies. You must use massive diplomacy to secure your connections and completely isolate your massive opponent. The sixth is serious ground. This occurs when an army has penetrated deeply into the absolute heart of hostile territory, leaving many strongly fortified enemy cities in its rear. The army is completely isolated from its own home. In this terrifying situation, Sun Tzu dictates that you must absolutely plunder the enemy. You must gather resources from the local environment because relying on a massive supply chain stretched across hundreds of miles of hostile territory will lead to absolute starvation and total ruin. The seventh is difficult ground. This includes massive mountain forests, incredibly treacherous swamps, and absolutely any geographical terrain that is incredibly hard to traverse. The absolute only rule for difficult ground is to keep marching. You must never make camp in a toxic swamp. You must completely exhaust your army to push through the difficult terrain as fast as physically possible. The eighth is hemmed-in ground. This is a terrifying geographical trap. It is a location reached through narrow gorges, where your entire massive army can be completely crushed by a tiny handful of hidden enemies. On hemmed-in ground, brute force is completely useless. Sun Tzu states that you must absolutely resort to stratagem and brilliant deception to escape the massive trap. The ninth and final terrain is the absolute core of the entire ancient text. It is known as desperate ground. Desperate ground is a location where you can only save yourself from absolute total destruction if you fight without a single second of delay. You are surrounded. There is absolutely no escape route. The massive mountains are behind you, the raging river is beside you, and the incredibly violent enemy is directly in front of you. Sun Tzu reveals a terrifying, profoundly brilliant truth about human biology. A human being will only fight with absolute, supernatural strength when all avenues of escape are destroyed. If a human being possesses a comfortable backup plan, they will never commit their entire soul to the battle. When the human mind knows that retreat is physically possible, the mind will always choose the absolute comfort of retreat. The very second the pain of conflict becomes severe, the Master General completely understands this massive biological weakness. Therefore, the master strategist purposefully forces their own army onto completely desperate ground. Sun Tzu states that you must throw your soldiers into positions from which there is absolutely no escape, and they would prefer death to flight. If they face death, there is nothing they cannot achieve. Officers and men alike will put forth their utmost strength. Soldiers in desperate straits lose the absolute sense of fear. If there is no place of refuge, they will stand incredibly firm. The Master General completely burns the boats. The Master General completely shatters the cooking pots. They show their soldiers that there is absolutely no going back. The only possible way to survive is to march straight through the absolute center of the massive enemy. When soldiers realize they are entirely trapped on desperate ground, their fear vanishes completely, replaced by a cold, highly calculating and completely unstoppable rage. They fight with a brutal ferocity that completely shatters armies 3 times their massive size. Let us transition directly into our massively expansive case study to witness this absolutely brilliant psychology executed perfectly in the modern corporate world. We will step into the incredibly high-stakes world of aerospace engineering to watch a massive corporate leader intentionally completely destroy his own safety net to achieve an absolute technological miracle. Enisarapine. Case Study 1. The Severed Lifeline and the Desperate Miracle. Meet Victor. Victor is the visionary founder and chief executive officer of an incredibly innovative aerospace engineering firm. His highly dedicated team is attempting to build a completely revolutionary drone propulsion system. This massive technological leap will entirely disrupt the global logistics market and completely dominate international defense contracts. However, building revolutionary hardware is incredibly expensive and deeply complicated. Victor has completely exhausted his massive venture capital funding. The corporate bank accounts are almost empty. The company is exactly 1 month away from absolute financial bankruptcy and total corporate ruin. The engineering team is incredibly brilliant, but they are completely stuck. They have been trying to solve a massive thermal overheating problem for 6 continuous months without any real success. They are working standard corporate hours, taking long lunches, and completely lacking the absolute intensity required to achieve an engineering breakthrough. Why are they so relaxed while the company is completely dying? Because they are standing entirely on dispersive ground. They have a massive psychological backup plan. A giant, deeply arrogant international defense contractor has been quietly watching their struggles. This massive corporate empire completely understands the immense value of the unfinished prototype. The massive empire formally offers Victor an incredibly comfortable corporate buyout package revenge. They will purchase his completely failing company for just enough money to completely cover his massive debts and give his engineers comfortable, highly secure corporate jobs inside their boring bureaucracy. The engineering team secretly, desperately wants Victor to accept the buyout. They deeply desire to be completely rescued. They want the absolute safety of the massive corporate umbrella. They know the official buyout offer expires in exactly 7 days. Therefore, they subconsciously stop trying to solve the massive thermal problem. They completely give up on the revolutionary prototype. They are simply waiting for Victor to surrender to the giant empire. If Victor were a weak, highly emotional leader, he would immediately accept the comfortable buyout. He would let his massive revolutionary vision completely die in exchange for temporary financial safety and public comfort. But Victor studies the ancient masters. He understands the absolutely terrifying power of desperate ground. He knows his team will absolutely never achieve greatness as long as they have a comfortable escape route. He decides to execute the most terrifying psychological maneuver in the entire corporate world. He decides to permanently burn the massive boats. Victor calls an immediate, highly mandatory meeting. The entire engineering team gathers in the massive testing warehouse, completely expecting him to announce the corporate buyout. They are already smiling, anticipating their incredibly comfortable new salaries and their absolute safety. Victor walks to the front of the concrete room. He absolutely does not smile. He holds up the physical legal contract from the massive defense empire. In absolute terrifying silence, he completely tears the incredibly lucrative buyout contract into tiny pieces and violently drops them on the concrete floor. The entire engineering team gasps in absolute total horror. Victor looks them directly in the eyes and delivers an absolutely terrifying speech. He tells them that he just completely destroyed the absolutely only financial lifeline they had left. He tells them that he personally remortgaged his own family home that very morning to secure exactly 2 more weeks of corporate payroll. He dictates with absolute authority that there is absolutely no backup plan. There is absolutely no corporate rescue. There is absolutely no comfortable future waiting for them inside a massive empire. He places them completely on desperate ground. He tells them that if they do not solve the massive thermal overheating problem in exactly 14 days, the company will completely dissolve. Their professional reputations will be entirely ruined and they will absolutely all lose their jobs. They are completely trapped. The absolutely only possible way out is to achieve the engineering miracle. The psychological shift in the massive warehouse is absolutely instantaneous and completely violent. The comfort entirely vanishes. The laziness completely evaporates. When the highly intelligent engineers realize that their absolute survival is entirely dependent on their own brilliance, their brains instantly unlock a massive level of intense focus they never even knew they possessed. They absolutely stop taking long lunches. They completely stop going home at 5 in the evening. They completely abandon their standard operating procedures. Because they are trapped entirely on desperate ground, they become highly creative, completely unorthodox and incredibly aggressive. They boldly test highly dangerous, previously ignored hypotheses. They work through the dead of night, completely fueled by the terrifying adrenaline of absolute survival. On the 11th day, exactly 3 days before total financial annihilation, the absolute miracle actually happens. The junior engineer, forced entirely into a state of total creative desperation, completely reconceptualizes the entire cooling architecture. They test the massive new prototype. The thermal overheating problem is entirely solved. The massive propulsion system works completely perfectly, breaking absolutely every single industry efficiency record ever recorded. Victor takes the flawless, mathematically undeniable testing data directly to a massive international venture capital syndicate. Because the revolutionary technology is now completely proven, the massive syndicate instantly wires him $50 million in completely fresh, highly aggressive funding. Victor saved his entire corporate empire and secured a massive global monopoly. He achieved this absolute total victory not by being kinder to his team, but by being completely ruthless with their environment. He intentionally destroyed their psychological safety net. He put them entirely on desperate ground, completely forcing them to fight with the absolutely terrifying power of completely cornered beasts. This incredibly expansive case study holds the absolute ultimate secret to your own personal success and massive growth. You are completely failing to achieve your absolute biggest goals entirely because you have too many comfortable backup plans. You are entirely too comfortable. You desperately want to start a massive corporate empire, but you keep your highly secure, deeply boring daytime job just in case you fail. Because you have a highly secure job. Your massive human brain knows that failing your new business is completely safe. Therefore, you never truly dedicate your entire soul to the massive business. You absolutely never work through the night. You completely avoid taking the terrifying risks required for absolute victory. You are choosing to fight entirely on dispersive ground. You want to achieve absolute physical fitness, but you keep highly toxic junk food hidden completely in the back of your massive kitchen pantry just in case you have a completely bad day. You are leaving an incredibly easy avenue of retreat completely completely open. Therefore, the very second your massive workout becomes incredibly difficult, your brain will entirely convince you to retreat to the comfort of the pantry. If you truly want to achieve supreme excellence in absolutely any massive endeavor, you must purposefully put yourself entirely on desperate ground. You must completely burn your own massive boats, destroy your comfortable backup plans, make incredibly massive public commitments that you absolutely cannot back out of without suffering complete absolute humiliation. Put your massive financial resources completely on the absolute line. When your brilliant human brain truly understands that failure directly equals absolute destruction, your incredible brain will magically find the exact path to absolute victory. Completely stop seeking comfort. Comfort is the absolute ultimate assassin of massive human potential. Deliberately seek the terrifying desperation that absolutely forces you to become completely invincible. We are exploring the absolute nuclear option of ancient warfare. We are stepping into chapter 12, focusing entirely on the attack by fire and the absolute ultimate warning against emotional leadership. Chapter 12, the attack by fire and the architecture of absolute ruin. When we think of ancient combat, we typically imagine swords, arrows, and massive physical formations. But Sun Tzu understood that physical combat is incredibly slow and highly exhausting. To achieve absolute destruction of a massive enemy in an incredibly short amount of time, the ancient masters used the most terrifying force of nature. They used fire. Sun Tzu outlines 5 specific methods of attacking with fire. You burn the soldiers in their camp. You burn the massive supply stores. You burn the baggage trains. You burn the physical arsenals. And you hurl dropping fire entirely into the enemy territory. In the modern corporate and personal world, fire does not mean literal flames. Fire represents an absolute, completely irreversible system shock. It is the public exposure of a massive, undeniably toxic scandal. It is the sudden launch of a completely disruptive technology that instantly renders the entire business model of your opponent completely obsolete. It is an absolutely ruthless, hostile corporate takeover. It is the nuclear option. However, Sun Tzu issues a massive, highly specific warning regarding the deployment of this absolute weapon. You cannot simply launch a fire attack whenever you feel angry. If you strike without calculating the environment, the fire will completely blow back and entirely consume you. Sun Tzu dictates that there must be a completely suitable time and an absolutely appropriate day for raising fires. The season must be incredibly dry, and you must absolutely wait for the rising of the wind. If the wind is blowing away from the enemy and directly toward your own camp, setting a fire is absolute suicide. You must wait patiently for the entire physical environment to perfectly align with your destructive intentions. But the most profound and deeply philosophical lesson of chapter 12 is not about the physical destruction of the enemy. It is a terrifying warning about the massive frailty of the human ego. Sun Tzu delivers what is arguably the most important leadership principle in the entire history of human conflict. He dictates that a ruler must absolutely never put troops into the field simply to gratify his own spleen. A general must absolutely never fight a battle completely out of pique. If it is to your absolute advantage, make a forward move. If it is not to your absolute advantage, stay exactly where you are. Anger may in time change to gladness. Vexation may be succeeded by absolute content. But a destroyed kingdom can never be restored to existence, nor can the dead ever be brought back to life. Therefore, the enlightened ruler is deeply heedful, and the good general is full of caution. Let us transition directly into our massively expansive case study to witness this terrifying weapon deployed flawlessly in the modern corporate world. We will watch a brilliant strategist completely resist the urge to fight out of temporary anger, waiting entirely for the perfect environmental wind to absolutely incinerate a massive corporate giant. Case study 1. The Silent Arsonist and the Scorched Earth. Meet Jonathan. Jonathan is the brilliant chief executive officer of a highly innovative, incredibly agile financial technology firm. He has spent years building a completely revolutionary digital banking platform. His absolute biggest obstacle is a massive, deeply corrupt legacy banking institution. We will call this giant empire the Leviathan. The Leviathan possesses hundreds of billions of dollars. They control the local politicians, they dominate the global financial media, and they absolutely despise Jonathan. During a massive international financial summit, the incredibly arrogant executives of the Leviathan launch a highly coordinated, incredibly vicious public attack against Jonathan. They mock his technology in front of the entire global press. Furthermore, they use their massive wealth to completely poach his 3 absolutely best software engineers, intentionally trying to humiliate him and destroy his corporate morale. If Jonathan were an amateur, highly emotional leader, he would completely fall for the trap. He would suffer from a massive surge of completely uncontrollable anger. He would launch an immediate, highly aggressive legal strike. He would go to the media and publicly scream about the massive injustice. He would attack the enemy exactly when the enemy was completely prepared for the attack. But Jonathan studies the ancient masters. He understands that fighting a battle entirely out of pique is absolute corporate suicide. He looks closely at the environment. The regulatory weather is completely wrong. The local politicians are still heavily bribed by the Leviathan, and the global media still worships the massive banking empire. If Jonathan strikes now, the wind will completely blow the fire directly back into his own face. Jonathan completely swallows his massive pride. He does not say a single word to the global press. He simply goes back to his isolated headquarters and completely fortifies his own tactical disposition. He waits for the dry season. He waits for the absolutely perfect wind. For 2 entirely agonizing years, Jonathan operates in complete absolute silence. While he is completely rebuilding his engineering team, his incredibly brilliant data analysts make a terrifying discovery. They discover that the Leviathan is secretly engaging in incredibly toxic, completely illegal subprime mortgage lending. The massive legacy bank is literally building its entire global empire on a massive foundation of highly flammable, totally fraudulent debt. Jonathan completely resists the urge to release this massive information immediately. The wind is not right yet. He carefully packages the absolutely undeniable mathematical evidence into a highly encrypted global dossier. He keeps the weapon completely hidden in the absolute dark. Suddenly, the global environment radically changes. A tiny, seemingly insignificant regional bank collapses, triggering a massive wave of global financial panic. The local politicians who once protected the Leviathan are entirely voted out of office, replaced by incredibly aggressive, highly motivated federal regulators demanding absolute transparency in the banking sector. The global media completely turns against the massive legacy banks. The season is finally completely dry. The massive regulatory wind is howling directly toward the front gates of the Leviathan. Jonathan absolutely pulls the trigger. He executes the ultimate attack by fire. He does not simply sue them. He completely coordinates the simultaneous global release of his incredibly revolutionary, fully compliant banking platform. On the same morning, he anonymously drops the absolutely undeniable, completely devastating dossier, proving the massive illegal fraud of the Leviathan directly onto the desks of every single major federal regulator and global investigative journalist on the planet. The results are absolutely catastrophic and incredibly instantaneous. The massive fire completely consumes the Leviathan. The global media and the highly aggressive federal regulators act as the massive wind, fanning the absolute flames of the scandal into a towering inferno of corporate destruction. The stock price of the Leviathan completely drops to zero in exactly 48 hours. The incredibly arrogant executives are publicly led out of their massive glass towers in federal handcuffs. Their massive corporate clients completely panic, desperately searching for a secure place to store their billions of dollars. Because Jonathan released his fully compliant, completely secure platform on the same day, he is the perfect refuge. The massive clients completely abandon the burning ruins of the Leviathan and immediately transfer their massive wealth entirely into the secure ecosystem of Jonathan. Jonathan completely conquered the global industry. He did not achieve this absolute total victory by being the loudest or the most aggressive. He achieved it by completely mastering his own human ego. He completely refused to fight when he was deeply insulted. He waited 2 entirely silent years for the absolutely perfect environmental conditions, and when the wind finally aligned, he deployed a weapon so completely devastating that his massive enemy was entirely erased from the global map. This beautiful and terrifying case study holds the absolute ultimate lesson for your own daily existence and your interpersonal conflicts. We absolutely destroy our own lives every single day because we fight our battles entirely out of temporary anger. When a highly toxic coworker insults you, your immediate instinct is to absolutely explode and scream at them in the middle of the office. That is a massive attack by fire launched without checking the wind. The human resources department will entirely view you as the aggressor, and the fire will completely consume your own corporate career. When your romantic partner deeply frustrates you, your immediate ego demands that you absolutely launch a massive emotional attack, simply to gratify your own spleen. You say completely unforgivable things simply to win a temporary argument. Anger may in time change to gladness, but a destroyed relationship can absolutely never be restored to perfect trust. Your ultimate practical application for this chapter is to completely detach your human ego from your strategic execution. When you suffer a massive insult, you must absolutely freeze. Do not send the angry email. Do not launch the massive lawsuit. Do not start the incredibly toxic argument. Completely swallow your pride and deeply analyze the environmental wind. Is it absolutely to your advantage to fight in this exact moment, or are you simply trying to soothe your own deeply wounded ego? You must learn to wait for the dry season. Build your completely undeniable evidence in absolute silence. Perfect your own tactical disposition. Wait for the exact moment when the toxic behavior of your opponent completely isolates them from their own support network. When the wind is blowing absolutely perfectly against them, you completely execute your strategic boundary. You remove them from your life completely and absolutely. When you master the brilliant art of withholding your fire, you eliminate the massive self-inflicted wounds of emotional leadership. We are exploring the 13th and final chapter of The Art of War. This chapter focuses entirely on the absolutely most powerful weapon in the history of the universe. It is not a weapon of iron, and it is not a weapon of fire. It is the absolute mastery of information. We are stepping completely into the use of spies. Chapter 13, the divine manipulation of threads and the architecture of truth. Sun Tzu begins this final chapter by destroying the absolute arrogance of cheap leadership. He dictates that raising a massive army and marching them across a tremendous distance requires an incredibly massive expenditure of the public treasure. The daily cost of feeding, housing, and moving a massive organization is incredibly astronomical because the cost of active conflict is so completely devastating. Sun Tzu states that it is the absolute height of inhumanity to remain entirely ignorant of the condition of your enemy simply because you grudge an incredibly small amount of money for intelligence gathering. Thou, an enlightened ruler and a brilliant general, completely conquer their enemies precisely because their absolute foreknowledge allows them to strike with perfectly calculated precision. Sun Tzu delivers a deeply profound philosophical statement regarding this absolute foreknowledge. He dictates that this vital information cannot be entirely elicited from spirits. It cannot be completely obtained inductively from human experience, nor by any massive deductive calculation. Absolute foreknowledge can only be obtained from other human beings who completely know the enemy situation. To achieve this absolute total mastery of information, Sun Tzu outlines the incredibly brilliant architecture of the intelligence web. He dictates that there are exactly 5 completely distinct classes of spies. When all 5 classes are completely active and entirely working together, absolutely no one can discover the secret system. Sun Tzu calls this massive intelligence web the divine manipulation of the threads. The first class is local spies. In the modern world, these are the completely average people operating daily inside the environment of their opponent. They are the entry-level employees, the delivery drivers, and the external vendors. They see the physical reality of the opponent completely unvarnished by corporate public relations. The second class is inward spies. These are the disgruntled officials and highly placed executives completely inside the camp of the enemy. They are the highly ambitious managers who are completely passed over for a promotion, or the deeply greedy executives who feel completely underappreciated. You use their massive bruised egos to completely turn them against their own sovereign. The third class is converted spies. These are the corporate spies of your enemy whom you have completely caught. Instead of punishing them, you offer them incredible wealth and completely turn them into double agents. You use them to feed perfectly calculated, highly deceptive information directly back to their original masters. The fourth class is doom spies. This is the absolute most ruthless tactic in the entire ancient text. You intentionally give false information to your own completely loyal spies. You absolutely know they will be captured by the enemy. When they are captured, they will fiercely confess the false information, completely believing it to be the absolute truth. The enemy will act on the false truth and fall entirely into your massive trap. The spy is completely doomed, but the absolute victory is entirely secured. The fifth class is surviving spies. These are your absolute most trusted, highly intelligent lieutenants who physically enter the enemy camp, completely gather the absolute truth, and safely return to your headquarters to deliver the vital information. Sun Tzu dictates that the sovereign must treat the spies with the absolute highest intimacy and completely reward them with the absolute greatest wealth. Spies are the absolute most vital prerogative of the entire army. The entire massive physical army completely relies on its invisible intelligence to make every single physical movement. Let us transition directly into our massively expansive case study to witness this divine manipulation of the threads executed perfectly. We will step into the incredibly high-stakes world of global commercial real estate to watch a brilliant mastermind completely dismantle a massive, deeply corrupt empire absolutely entirely through the perfect use of information. Case study 1. The Invisible Architect and the Web of Whispers. Meet Arthur. Arthur is the brilliant chief executive officer of an incredibly agile, highly aggressive commercial development firm. His ultimate goal is to purchase and completely revitalize a massive, entirely abandoned industrial waterfront property. The absolute biggest obstacle in his path is a massive, deeply corrupt legacy real estate syndicate. We will call this giant empire the cartel. The cartel possesses hundreds of billions of dollars. They have completely dominated the local real estate market for exactly 50 continuous years by using massive intimidation, completely endless legal lawsuits, and absolute brute force financial pressure. The cartel absolutely wants the massive waterfront property, and they plan to completely crush Arthur the absolute second the property becomes officially available for public purchase. If Arthur were an amateur, highly emotional leader, He would completely ignore the intelligence gathering phase. He would blindly save his money, wait for the massive public auction, and try to absolutely fight the cartel in a completely doomed frontal financial assault. The cartel would easily outbid him and destroy his entire massive vision. But Arthur studies the ancient masters. He understands that absolute foreknowledge is the completely singular key to total victory. Before he spends a single dollar on massive architecture plans, Arthur completely builds the divine manipulation of the threads. Arthur begins by quietly establishing his local spies. He does not approach the massive executives of the cartel. He quietly approaches the incredibly low-paid custodial staff who clean the massive corporate headquarters of the cartel. He completely pays them incredibly generous consulting fees simply to observe the physical trash. The custodial staff absolutely reports that massive amounts of highly sensitive legal documents are being hastily shredded on the 5th floor every single Friday afternoon. Arthur realizes the 5th floor is the absolute center of their acquisition planning. He immediately moves to establish his inward spies. He completely analyzes the corporate structure of the 5th floor. He absolutely discovers a highly brilliant, deeply senior female executive who has been completely passed over for the chief executive position 3 entirely separate times, simply because the corrupt culture of the cartel entirely favors their own massive family relatives. Arthur quietly approaches her, absolutely validates her massive brilliance, and offers her an incredibly lucrative position on his own, completely new executive board on the absolute condition that she quietly feeds him the internal corporate strategy of the cartel. Because her ego is deeply bruised by her arrogant bosses, she eagerly agrees and becomes an incredibly powerful inward spy. Through his brilliant inward spy, Arthur discovers a completely terrifying piece of information. The cartel has secretly hired an external corporate spy to completely infiltrate the administrative team of Arthur. They want to absolutely steal his maximum financial bidding limit so they can perfectly outbid him at the public auction by exactly $1 single. Arthur completely traps the enemy spy, but he absolutely does not fire him. Arthur executes the perfect deployment of the converted spy. He completely corners the corporate spy in a private room and offers to triple his absolutely massive illicit salary. Arthur completely turns the spy into a highly loyal double agent. Arthur intentionally feeds the converted spy completely false financial documents that mathematically prove Arthur only possesses exactly $50 million for the massive waterfront purchase. The converted spy absolutely delivers this completely false intelligence directly back to the deeply arrogant executives at the cartel. Arthur then executes the absolutely terrifying maneuver of the doomed spy. He intentionally creates a completely fake, incredibly detailed architectural proposal for an entirely different massive property located on the opposite side of the massive city. He intentionally allows this completely fake proposal to be secretly discovered by his own highly ambitious junior executives. He completely knows these junior executives love to gossip at the local financial bars. The junior executives absolutely leak the completely fake strategy to the external market. The cartel hears the massive rumors and completely believes that Arthur has entirely lost interest in the waterfront property. Finally, Arthur deploys his absolute best surviving spies. He absolutely sends his most brilliant financial auditors to quietly verify absolutely every single piece of data they have gathered from the incredibly complex web of manipulation. The surviving spies return with the absolutely mathematically perfect truth. Arthur absolutely knows everything. He completely knows that the cartel entirely believes his maximum bid is exactly $50 million. He absolutely knows they believe he is completely distracted by a different property on the opposite side of the city. He completely knows the exact day and the exact hour they plan to officially submit their highly arrogant, deeply massive bid for the waterfront property. The glorious day of the massive private auction finally arrives. The deeply arrogant executives of the cartel casually submit a completely confident bid of exactly $51 million, entirely expecting a completely effortless victory. They pop incredibly expensive champagne in their massive corporate headquarters, absolutely believing they have completely crushed their tiny opponent. Exactly 1 single minute before the absolute closing deadline of the entire auction, Arthur absolutely strikes. He completely bypasses the $50 million illusion because he saved incredible amounts of massive capital by completely avoiding a long public legal battle. He has secretly secured incredibly massive offshore funding. Arthur completely submits a mathematically flawless, completely absolute bid of exactly $80 million in pure, highly liquid cash. The massive auction committee completely accepts the absolutely undeniable bid of Arthur. The completely shocking news hits the corporate headquarters of the cartel like an absolutely massive nuclear bomb. The deeply arrogant executives completely drop their expensive champagne. They are absolutely paralyzed in total terrified confusion. They cannot absolutely understand how their massive corporate spies failed them so completely. They cannot absolutely comprehend how their entire massive intelligence network was completely manipulated and entirely weaponized against them. Arthur completely conquered the massive waterfront property and entirely broke the global monopoly of the cartel without ever absolutely fighting a single public battle. He completely achieved his absolute total victory entirely through the divine manipulation of the massive threads. He absolutely bought the massive information. He completely controlled the deceptive narrative, and he absolutely struck precisely when the enemy was completely blind. This incredibly beautiful and deeply terrifying case study holds the absolute ultimate lesson for your entire existence. The massive battles of your daily professional career and your personal life are absolutely won or lost based on the massive quality of the information you completely possess. We entirely fail in negotiations because we absolutely guess what the other party truly desires. We completely fail in our massive corporate careers because we entirely assume we absolutely know what our toxic bosses truly want. Completely, instead of actually gathering absolute, undeniable intelligence. We fight completely blind every single day, relying on incredibly massive assumptions and incredibly weak intuition entirely, instead of the absolutely undeniable truth. Your ultimate practical application for this completely final chapter is to absolutely eradicate the massive culture of guessing from your entire existence. If you absolutely want a massive corporate promotion, do not completely guess what the massive executives actually value. You must completely build an intelligence web. Speak quietly to the administrative assistants who actually manage the massive calendars. Seek out the completely disgruntled former employees who can absolutely tell you the deeply hidden toxic truths of the massive corporate culture. Information is absolute supreme power. Do not absolutely grudge the time, the incredible energy, or the massive resources completely required to obtain the absolute truth. You must completely observe the absolutely hidden patterns, absolutely verify every single piece of massive data, and completely weaponize the absolute truth entirely against the massive illusions of your opponents. When you completely master the absolutely divine manipulation of the hidden threads, you become completely invincible in the massive theater of human conflict. This officially concludes our massively expansive, incredibly intense journey through the absolutely entire text of the art of war. You now completely possess the absolute ultimate psychological operating system for total global victory. You absolutely know how to calculate perfectly, maneuver completely silently, absolutely read the hidden environments, and completely manipulate the entirely massive fabric of human reality. If this massive psychological exploration has completely changed the way you entirely view the entire world, please remember to perfectly check the completely secure description located absolutely below. There is a completely safe, absolutely secure link to completely purchase a physical copy of The Art of War. If you completely want to absolutely buy the absolutely massive book, please use our entirely secure link. It will absolutely not cost you anything extra. Still, it will absolutely massively help us achieve total financial freedom, allowing this massive channel to continue producing these expansive deep dives into the most important books. Thank you completely for your absolutely massive time, your entirely incredible focus, and your absolutely total dedication to achieving completely supreme excellence. Protect your incredibly massive reality, gather your absolutely perfect intelligence, and perfectly always secure your completely absolute ultimate total victory.